Good evening. The February 13th meeting of the Evanston City Council will come to order. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Reed.
Here.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Here.
Councilmember Kelly. Here. Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Harris.
Present.
Councilmember Newsma.
Present.
Councilmember Burns.
Present.
Councilmember Suffredin.
Here.
Councilmember Brevell.
Here.
Mayor Biss.
Here. We have a quorum present and are prepared to do our work for the evening. The first item on the agenda is the mayor's public announcements and proclamations. And we are joined today by representatives from Evanston Own It. I see Pastor Dillard here. For those of you who don't know, you should. Evanston Own It is a really important pillar in this community. It's really a conglomeration of faith leaders in an effort to support our youth and support our efforts to stop violence in this community, and they've been a really critical partner. Every year they engage in a generous act to support the city's efforts, and I just wanted to bring Pastor Dillard forward if you're willing to say a few words about the work you've been doing.
Good evening, Mayor Biss. Always a pleasure to the alderman of the ward in which I live and lead, Alderman Burns, and to the entire city council. Thank you all so much for making time for us tonight. I am Monte Dillard. I serve as a senior pastor of the First Church of God Christian Life Center, but more specifically tonight, I serve as the chairperson of Evanston Own It, an organization comprised of clergy and community members from the 5th and 2nd wards. Tonight, in addition to our presentation, I'd first like to read a letter that Evanston Own It would like submitted into the record. To the City of Evanston City Council, I am Pastor Monte L.G. Dillard Sr., and I currently serve as a chairperson of Evanston Own It, a Christian organization comprised of pastors and community members predominantly from the 5th and 2nd wards. For nearly 1 decade, Evanston Own It has led the charge in providing support, voice, and action to our community to ensure that we, in fact, own it. I am writing the City Council today on behalf of our entire organization to express our support for the Rebuild Ryan Field initiative. As we have had opportunity to hear the presentation of plans in depth, we consider it our responsibility to not only support this endeavor, but to also ensure that we contribute to its impact that it will have on the community in which we serve. It is our unified expectation that the opportunities that this rebuild will present will include the many professionals and skilled workers that are a part of our community. As this rebuild will serve as a shining example of the amazing prowess that our city holds, we want to lend our support as decisions are made to ensure equitable outcomes for all those in our city and for our community to have significant consideration. In many ways, our decision to support Rebuild Ryan Field is a way in which we can stick to our mission of owning it. In conclusion, we, Evanston Own It, would let it be known that we are offering our full support to the processes associated with Rebuild Ryan Field and are in great expectation of its impact on all communities in the city of Evanston, particularly the communities in which we as an organization serve. Graciously submitted, Pastor Monte L.G. Dillard, Senior Chairperson of Evanston Own It, and we'd like to submit a copy to City Council for records for future purposes. I was going to say, let the church say amen, but I forgot. I forgot where I was. We are here, though, tonight primarily because it became...
You know, Pastor, I think that's the first time that this room has never been confused for sanctuary. So I will take that compliment, and it will lift me up for a long time to come.
Yeah, I'm being prophetic, Mayor. I'm being prophetic. However, we are here primarily on tonight, as is our custom of Evanston Own It, to stand here in the month of February annually to present to the City of Evanston's Summer Youth Employment Program our annual donation. It was several years ago, after learning that our city was in a season of making tough decisions that included some budget cuts, and we wanted to, in some way, create some significant impact to particularly the Summer Youth Employment Program. It was proposed to us by one of our founding members, the late Pastor Zolly Webb, who was a City of Evanston employee, as well as the former pastor of the Friendship Missionary Baptist Church, that we would raise money, and each year we would make a donation to the Evanston City Youth Employment Program that maybe just a couple more young people than was budgeted for would be able to be employed. To date, before tonight, our donation as an organization has been $55,000 to this effort, with also $4,000 to the Officer and Gentleman Program. Tonight we have come with a check for $9,000, $8,000 of which will go to the City of Evanston Youth Employment Program, and $1,000 to be earmarked again for the Officer and the Gentleman, bringing our total contributions to date of $63,000 to the Summer Youth Employment Program and $5,000 to Officer and a Gentleman. It is our distinct pleasure to continue to do this, and it is our hope that the impact will provide additional jobs for our young people, giving them options that they, their families, and our community can continue to benefit from. Thank you all so much for your continued support, and we look forward to continuing this relationship in the future. Yeah, come here in the middle. Tonight we are joined by Pastor Eldridge Ford of Global Ministries and our treasurer, Mrs. Lou Halliburton. Her and her husband, Nathaniel Halliburton, are the sole proprietors of the one of two black funeral homes in the city of Evanston, Halliburton Funeral Home. We have 16 churches and pastors that are part of Evanston on it, many of which are traveling or had other schedules tonight and could not be here. Thank you all so much.
Mayor, can we deposit a check of that size at whoever we bank with? Will they take that?
I may be the mayor, but I'm not the expert on the back of the house of our banking system. But thank you. There's not a better cause in this organization than finding employment for young people. So I hope you know that support is deeply appreciated, and I know you know that it will be meticulously and carefully spent to do the maximum good for this community. Thank you very much to all of Evanston. Next on the agenda is the city manager's public announcements.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, members of City Council, Clerk Mendoza. I want to take a moment, as long as Pastor Dillard is here in the council chambers, to also thank him for his incredible service as our fire chaplain. We've kept him very busy, especially in the last couple of weeks, and just really appreciate your dedication to the city and the fire department. So thank you for that. Next up, we have a famous librarian in the council chambers tonight. I'd like to ask our teen services librarian, Miss Madison, to come up to the podium, and I'm going to turn it over to Heather Norberg.
Hello. Thank you, City Manager Stowe, Mayor Biss, and members of the City Council. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person tonight for this really exciting recognition. I'm here tonight to tell you about an amazingly dedicated employee of the Evanston Public Library and to ask you to join me in congratulating her for her recent acceptance of the American Library Association's I Love My Librarian Award. This award is very special because it invites library users to recognize the accomplishments of exceptional librarians in their community. Each year, up to 10 librarians from around the country are chosen for this honor, which includes a $5,000 cash award. Last month, our own Alicia Madison, who's joining you tonight, received this honor at the American Library Association's Winter Conference in New Orleans. Alicia has worked for the Evanston Public Library for over 5 years in roles of increasing responsibility and reach, including most recently as our Teen Engagement Coordinator and currently as our Interim Innovation and Digital Learning Manager. Alicia was nominated by members of the Evanston community and Evanston Public Library staff for making a difference and going above and beyond to serve our community, especially teens, with the many innovative, engaging, and fun programs that she brings out to schools, parks, community gardens, and partner organizations such as Family Focus and Fleetwood Jourdain Community Center. I could go on and on about Alicia and her many talents as a community builder and advocate for our patrons, but I'll stop now and ask you to join me in saying congratulations to Alicia for this well-deserved recognition, and also thank you, Alicia, for your dedication and service to our community through your work at the library.
Okay, I'll be quick. I'll read my speech that I read at the award. I said, someone once told me that librarians can really party, so let's, bear with me. I said, last month, my mom asked me, what's the I Love My Librarian Award? I explained to her how 10 people are chosen across the U.S. for being exceptional librarians and making profound impact on the people in their communities. I began to list some of the many awesome things that we do at our own Evanston Public Library, like developing the 101 book list for kids, job readiness kits, hotspots and tech trainers, a teen space filled with maker programs and hydroponic gardening, a social worker, adult Lego club, books on wheels, and did I mention I drive the bookmobile, so I'm able to offer all of these resources out into the community. My mom was amazed and echoed, just like so many others, that she didn't know that the library offered all of these programs and resources, and that she thought we were just books. As I talked about how the library is more than just four walls and books and how we are adapting to address the needs of the community, I could see that she was still a little lost about what the award was. I simply told her it's the Oscars in the library world, hence my attire, and I was being recognized for Best Librarian voted by the community, and my colleagues for doing what my parents and grandmother has always taught me to do, which is simply be good to people even when there is no one around and taking care of your community. I had a lot of people be good to me growing up on the south side of Chicago, and I made a promise that I would invest in the youth in the community just like they did me. I want to thank my strong support system, who this would not be possible without. I was working 2 jobs and raising 2 boys under 2 while maintaining a 4.0 GPA in library school. Besides the grace of God, my husband has been my rock, and this would not be possible without him. He has even been slightly open. Well, we're still working it out, but me turning our house into an indoor garden with over 200 plants to provide fresh veggies to the community. My family came together and did what was necessary so that I can continue to give back and help inspire the next generation of librarians. I never would have guessed that I'd be a librarian, but the role of a librarian is changing. This award makes me feel seen in a world where at times I feel invisible, like my work matters. And although we have a longer way to go, I'm happy to say that my coworkers are along for the ride. I love my job and I love being out in the community, truly making a difference. The library is more than just 4 walls, and I am proof of that. And so are my dynamic colleagues that I get the pleasure of working with every day. I know we don't wear capes, but librarians definitely have the power to make change. Thank you.
I just want to point out there were 10 winners across the country, and over 1,500 people were nominated across the country. So, and Mr. Mayor, that concludes my remarks.
Congratulations. Thanks for everything you do for this community. It's fabulous. Next on our agenda is communications from the city clerk.
Hi, I've sent everybody the public comment that was submitted. The one that was requested to be read out loud will be read out loud during public comment.
Speaking of, that brings us to public comment. There are actually slightly in excess of 30 people who are seeking to give comment this evening, so I'll give a minute and 30 seconds to each of you. We begin and always with those who signed up in person to speak in person, who will be begun by John Cleve, who will be followed by Jean Combs, and then Donna Pugh.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. It'll be a lot less than a minute 30. I know a lot of you have already heard from me. So I'm here just to plead with you all on a couple of things, one of which is, and this is to you, Mayor Biss, please let the process play out when it comes to both the zoning changes and the approval of connections at the Marguerite Inn. The fast-tracking thing has horrible optics, and moreover, it feels as if there are insider tracks that are going on and that it isn't open to the light today. I mean, I would love to hear from an objective outside expert to talk about this who is invested in one way or the other, so we hear all sides of this and can get it. And then the other thing I'm going to bring up real quickly is due diligence and to set up safeguards in all of the language that we do to put together the operating agreement and elsewhere, so that ultimately the city has protections. Because I have a feeling it could be a great thing. We're all happy with it. We do others like it. You guys, as the wards of the city, have to think about what if that isn't true. Trust but verify. So I'm going to let the process play out, and please make sure that the safeguards are in place so that ultimately 10 years from now we don't regret this like out in Albany Care. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jean Combs, who will be followed by Donna Pugh, and then Tricia Connolly.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I'm speaking tonight in my capacity as a psychiatrist who's been practicing in this country for 40 years and in this community, and who has seen the effects of homelessness that often presented to my office as depression and anxiety. And over the course of the 40 years that I've been practicing, we've cut back on social safety nets in this country to a point where people do not have adequate housing, and we have an organization in this community that's doing an excellent job with the most innovative practices. Their housing first philosophy is at the heart of what people in my profession think needs to be done to get people off the streets, to get people housed. And the Margarita Inn, which I live a block and a half from, is doing an excellent job, a safe job. I walk past it. I go downtown every day, regardless of what some other people have said. And I think we're losing money to lawyers that should go to homelessness every time we let somebody put delaying tactics on getting this place
15
in
seconds.
place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Donna Pugh, who will be followed by Tricia Connolly, and then Lynn Lampkin.
Mr. Mayor, I concede my time now. Okay, thank you.
Trish Connolly, who will be followed by Lynn Lampkin, and then Neil Gambo.
Tricia Conley, Second Ward. I'm wondering how we prioritize the voices and concerns of the residents here in Evanston. Why I ask is that it appears that we're into rush, and that rushing is not on behalf of the residents, but other organizations. It isn't clear with the proposed impact study that came before AP&W tonight. They were trying to vote that through after we had already, people came out to talk about that and their concerns around it. And from that, surprise, we know we need a bigger community engagement process. Well, that should be at the forefront. If senior management at our city is doing their job, they should be thinking of that first, not after. It wasn't clear when District 65 shared their options for a Fifth Ward school. All of a sudden, we're rushing to rebuild Fleetwood Jourdain at $50 to $70 million. This is unacceptable. Bring the people to the table first. Now it's concerning after 2 AP&W meetings where some of you voted and it passed to give a lease to this gentleman and the
15
Jensen
seconds.
Gardens, that now we're talking about Harley Clark including the gardens up for grabs. I don't get it. What's going on here? We got to figure this out. The sooner the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Len Lampkin, who will be followed by Neil Gambo and then Paul Khalil.
I'm a longtime Ninth Ward resident. Got to meet my new alderman for the first time tonight. I came to talk about Northwestern. I like the idea of the new stadium, but I want Northwestern to sign and for the city council and the city manager to hold them to an agreement. If they say they're going to hire black employees or Latino employees and they don't, what's the penalty? And they also should be required to give us a legacy, not a one-time donation, but a legacy agreement, so in lieu of taxes for the life of the stadium. I'll let the city manager figure out how much that should be, but I think it should be 10 to maybe even 20 million a year. They can afford it. They have the wealthiest endowment of any university in the country, and it's about time they paid their fair share before we give them the right to a new stadium. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Neil Gambo, who will be followed by Paul Khalil and then William Buell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about the Mather Emerge program and their request for a matching funds from the ARPA funds. The Emerge program has been something that's been worked on by me and some others that's really devoted to providing career opportunities for young people that are not going to go to college. Each year, ETHS graduates about 850 to 900 kids. 200 of them, roughly, don't go to college. And then 30% of the ones that do go don't make it through the first year. We have got to do everything we can to support young people so they can actually get living wage career opportunities with our local employers. Mather has stepped up. They've put their money up front, and they're asking for a match so we can double the number of kids to get there. And the Mather actually has a measurable program with already getting some results because, young people don't wait for people to put money up. They really want their opportunities. I've been at this Mayor's Employer Advisory Council stuff for almost 6 years now. I know what a good program looks like. And a good program looks like somebody that's a partner, someone that actually knows how to use funding, and someone that's willing to put up the results for everybody to see. So I urge you to go ahead and approve the ARPA fund matching funds for the Mather Emerge program. Thank you. Oh, by the way, the Mayor's Summer Youth Employment Program is terrific. It gives these young people an item for their resume that they need to really start putting together when they're in high school. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Paul Khalil, who will be followed by William Buell and then Mary Rosinski.
Thank you, Mayor Biss. Thank you to everyone for your service on the City Council. It's a thankless job, so we appreciate the work you do. I'm Paul Khalil, proud to be a Second Ward resident and proud to be president of Connections for the Homeless. The Board of Connections is comprised of leaders who care deeply about Evanston, and we're committed to this licensing process and making sure that it's fair and inclusive. We're committed to working with city leaders, with neighbors, with community leaders, with business leaders, with everyone involved. We're also committed to making the greatest impact possible and making a difference in the lives of people who are experiencing homelessness. If I heard correctly at the P&D meeting that just preceded this, the licensing discussions first started in 2015. So if we talk about this as a rushed process, I think that's a bit of a misnomer. Every delay costs money. Every legal fight or hearing requires legal support and staff time that costs money. That's money that could be spent providing services to find somebody permanent housing. That's money that could go to prevent someone from experiencing homelessness in the first place. That's money that could go to case management or health and wellness services or showers or laundry or food or clothing, all of which Connections provides for its participants. This can make the difference between a roof over your head or a winter on the street, between frustration and hope, and in some cases between life and death. So this is a well-run organization that's committed to making this work, and please make this an efficient process that can positively impact Evanston and ultimately save lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is William Buell, who will be followed by Mary Rosinski and then Don Ziegler. He's later. But I also have poor eyesight, so there it is. So let's go to Mary Rosinski, who will be followed by Don Ziegler and then Louise Brown.
Hi, nice to see you all this afternoon, evening. I do want to first of all say that I do agree with everything that Trish Conley said, so I won't repeat that part of it. I'm here to speak on the Ryan Field project, and I just want people in this city to be aware of what a huge, it's a problem, because the process that that corporation, just remember, it's a $14 billion corporation, rolled out their media campaign almost a year ago, but there were no details on anything. And so we're hearing that there were community meetings, but those community meetings did not provide any information as to what the nature of the project were. And four of the people who, they talked about, you saw the glossy pictures, but we have a comprehensive plan, and we have a municipal zoning code. And if we want to build trust in this community, we need to follow those, or we need to change them with community input. But we can't just ignore it because one of the largest, or the largest influencer in this town wants to step right outside of this. This project that they're doing, build the stadium, create the jobs, do it reasonably, but this is a 10-story building, and they want to have amplified sports events, other events, concerts, 7 days a week, from 10 in the morning, thank you, till 10 at night, and on the weekends till 11. And that's not appropriate for any community, any neighborhood in this community. And I think that's why this is a citywide issue that needs to be discussed. And I would hope you build trust by following our plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Don Ziegler, who will be followed by C. Louise Brown and then the Reverend Monte Dillard.
Good evening, Mayor Bliss and council members. We may not be a sanctuary, but this is hallowed ground as far as I'm concerned. Always consider this Evanston. My name is Don Ziegler, long resident of the 4th Ward, chair of the Evanston Health Advisory Council on the faculty of UIC School of Public Health. I do support the measures on the agenda to restrict how and where alcohol and cannabis products may be supported and used, and regarding Ordinance 1323. Wider consumption of these products has significant public safety, social, and health consequences. However, regarding cannabis, I hope that the measure tonight, if passed, will not be a step towards opening cannabis lounges in Evanston. In my public health advocacy class at UIC, I teach students that informed policymakers draw on and respect credible authorities. Evanston observed this in our adoption of indoor air, Tobacco 21, and our response to COVID-19. I trust that our civic leaders continue following health authorities such as CDC, the American Heart Association, Respiratory Health, and the psychiatric profession, and not authorize opening cannabis lounges in our city. Keep up the great work of making Evanston a thriving, healthy community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is C. Louise Brown, who will be followed by the Reverend Monte Dillard and then Sue Lolbach.
Good evening, council members. I'm here to amen Don Ziegler's comments. I am C. Louise Brown, and I'm a resident of Evanston's 8th Ward for a number of years. I'm also a public health professional, have been at the local and national level for years. I am here to oppose the adoption of any ordinance concerning cannabis that is different from those regulating tobacco smoking in indoor settings. Emphasize that. Cannabis smoking should be under the same clean air regulations that tobacco is, and that, I think that's what we're here to say. Secondhand cannabis smoking contains many of the same cancer-causing substances and toxic chemicals as secondhand smoking does. Decades ago, we believed that secondhand smoking didn't present any health hazards. Now, regulations, scientific research shows that it does. It does present hazards. Likewise, scientific research is demonstrating that breathing secondhand cannabis smoke indoors is dangerous to health and therefore should not be allowed in indoor service settings. Studies now show that detrimental levels of secondhand, I'm trying to say this fast,
15
secondhand
seconds.
cannabis smoke are higher levels than secondhand tobacco smoke. Studies show that. Google it yourself. It's there. It really is there. There's my time. Let me say this. Everyone has a right to breathe clean air. Government officials have a right to protect people. I know that. Okay. Smoke-free policies are designed to protect the public and all workers from exposure to health hazards caused by any exposure. Make cannabis the same clean air regs as tobacco.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the Reverend Monte Dillard, followed by Sue Lolbach, and then Gail Schechter.
Good evening. I'm Pastor Monte Dillard. Again, I have the distinct privilege of serving as a vice president of the Board of Directors for Connections for the Homeless. I have served in pastoral ministry for more than 12 years now, and several years ago, when asked to consider being on the Board of Directors for Connections, it was my assessment of the work that they had done to that point that drew me to say yes. You will not find this on Connections' website or in any language of its paperwork, but the truth of the matter is that the work of the organization is, in fact, God's work, to see about individuals who are vulnerable and challenged in many ways, and to see the efforts, the continual and consistent efforts of this organization to ensure that they are safe, cared for, and provided with services, essentially is divine work. I want to stand tonight to lend and voice my full support for the work that the organization is doing, particularly in its efforts to secure a permanent place for the clients of Connections to be housed. It was a tremendous and overwhelming effort that our executive director and this organization responded to during the pandemic, and now that model is continuing to prove to be one that is most beneficial, and it is my hope that they will continue to get the support of the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Sue Lolbach, who will be followed by Gail Schechter.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sue Lolbach, Director of Advocacy at Connections for the Homeless. While we're disappointed in another new delay to approval of our special use permit, we are very pleased that the city and Connections both signed the Good Neighbor Agreement last week, and we will be moving forward with implementing it. More than 30 neighbors, both proponents and opponents of the Margarita Inn, participated in development of this agreement, and we believe the end result will provide a good guide to communications among Connections, the city, and community members who choose to engage. Our next step will be to recruit members of the community to join a community advisory board that will serve as eyes and ears in the community for as long as we habit the Margarita Inn facility. The board will collaborate with Connections on handling concerns and help to organize public meetings about the Margarita Inn. We'll be asking the city for help in publicizing the recruitment process. In the meantime, between now and the final vote, we know you'll be hearing a lot from community members, both for and against the Margarita Inn, some of it conflicting, much of it confusing.
15 seconds.
If you have any questions or concerns about what you hear during that period, please contact me or anyone else from our leadership team to help, and we will provide as much clarity as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Gail Schechter.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Gail Schechter. I'm speaking here in my capacity as the Executive Director of Housing Opportunities and Maintenance for the Elderly, which serves low-income seniors and others in the city of Chicago. I'm speaking about the lodging establishments. And of course, I'm very supportive of the Margarita Inn. This is not about, I didn't even know this ordinance had anything to do with that. I'm looking at this because the kind of housing, which is the co-housing as described in the introduction here, that's what we do at home. We have shared housing for seniors, young adults, and families living under one roof. It's a form of independent living. So if you think of independent living as a continuum where on the one hand you have a single family home that you own, and on another you might have people sharing meals, activities. So I'm concerned about a licensing requirement. The city of Chicago does not require a home to be licensed for our intergenerational shared housing. So, it seems to me that would be a problem.
15 seconds.
And then the last piece of it is just a concern of a disparate impact on people with disabilities if there's a requirement for license. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to those who signed up online to speak in person, the most confusing category. We'll begin with Bill Brown, who is not William Buell. My apologies. He'll be followed by Charles Smith and then Sharon Fagan.
Good evening. My name is William Brown, and I serve as Vice President for the Jens Jensen Gardens in Evanston. I speak to you tonight to provide testimony for the public records on apparent circumvention of process related to the lease with Jens Jensen Gardens for the Coach House and Grounds at 2603 Sheridan Road, the Harley Clark property. Specifically, at the 123 meeting of the A&PW Committee, city staff was given clear direction to create a lease between the city and JJGE for the reference gardens and Coach House. The vote on the action was 4-1. Further, the lease was to return to A&PW for their approval before being presented to the City Council. This has not happened. This directive was disregarded, and the subject of the lease was inappropriately placed on tonight's agenda for discussion. How is it that specific directives from the City Council Committee was disregarded? This seems wrong. It should not have happened. I urge the City Council's direct staff to follow the will of the A&PW Committee and create a lease through cooperative discussion with JJGE, and then have that document on the agenda for a future City Council meeting. You will hear from 2 other board members this
15
evening
seconds.
on the appropriateness of this lease to be executed now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Charles Smith, followed by Sharon Fagan, and then Aaron Cohen.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Biss, City Manager Stowe. I want to talk to you tonight because evidently we submitted a lease to the legal department in September, which was reviewed, and then comments were posted in several city documents that had incomplete and confusing and in some cases misleading information. When we asked that these points be marked up in the lease and returned as our attorneys Kirkland and Ellis had requested, that was never followed up upon. Since that time, I've been contacted by a number of individuals and organizations interested in the mansion and were troubled by the comments that were made as a result of the review of our lease. Once they spoke with me and I had the opportunity to clarify these issues, in all cases they overwhelmingly supported a lease with the Jens Jensen organization for the grounds and Coach House. So I ask that a marked up lease be executed immediately, and we have the opportunity to discuss these various issues, and that there's been real harm because of the inaccuracies, and that those inaccuracies be corrected and reposted to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Sharon Fagan, who will be followed by Aaron Cohen and then Ben Gaspara.
Hi, good evening. I'm Sharon Fagan, and I'm also speaking on behalf of the council adopting a lease, signing a lease for the Jens Jensen Gardens and Coach House project. And as you perhaps know, the vision of this whole project is to reveal and restore the garden that was originally designed by Jens Jensen and demonstrate the beautiful natural habitat in Evanston, provide a good environment for residents and youth to learn about landscaping and to work on beautifying this public space for all. And this project is somewhat unique in bringing together so many different parts of the community, young, old, black, white, Hispanic, and it's a really special project that has very wide appeal. And it can get underway immediately if we can get this worked out with the lease. There has been this really odd delay, and we also firmly believe that getting this lease and getting this work underway will
15
truly
seconds.
help get the Harley Clark Mansion done as well, because it will help to get grants, tax credits, to see this space as the staging grounds for the Harley Clark Mansion. So I urge you to move forward on this special project for Evanston. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Aaron Cohen, who will be followed by Ben Gaspara and then Kevin Dahlgren.
I'm on Zoom, Mayor Biss. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
The Planning and Development Committee voted very wisely to send out an RFP for a citywide study of economic and quality of life factors vis-a-vis the Ryan Field Plan. But it's really sad that we taxpayers are forced to pay tens of thousands of dollars to make up for NU's refusal to be collaborative or transparent about its Ryan mega entertainment complex. We've heard a lot of promises, but please demand that NU divulge the full CSL study, which underlies the Trip Umbach PR piece. Northwestern so far has refused to do that, and it makes you wonder, what are they hiding vis-a-vis their business assumptions? What will this Ryan plan, which ironically contradicts the Evanston Thrives vision, cost us? And only when we know that, I think, will we be able to decide whether it'll be good for Evanston or not. So even though Northwestern wants to steamroller zoning changes, please don't even think about it before Evanston's own independent study is done. And meanwhile, demand transparency. Ask Northwestern to share with us the CSL study. Thanks an awful lot.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ben Gaspara, who will be followed by Kevin Dahlgren.
Good evening, councilmen and councilwomen. My name is Ben Gaspara, and I'm a resident of the 6th Ward. I'm here tonight as a representative of the One Community Museum and Gardens nonprofit. We were one of the respondents to the RFP for the restoration and reuse of the Harley Clark Mansion. I just have a few things I want to say tonight. First, our nonprofit has been successfully operating since 2019, is growing, and that we remain unwavering in our commitment to transform the property at 2603 Sheridan Road into a destination location which celebrates sustainability, community, and local economics, consistent with Evanston's own stated initiatives. I'm hopeful that the council will remain steadfast in honoring the voices of Evanston, in which nearly 80% of voters were interested in saving the Harley Clark House. Second, we are open to working in collaborative or a joint way with the city or other like-minded groups to preserve and protect this historically significant, structurally sound, and quite frankly, beautiful building, and return it as a functioning asset, and moreover, serve as a crown jewel on Evanston's lake shore. Also, we did submit a letter that details more of One Community's ongoing activities. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kevin Dahlgren.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Kevin Dahlgren. I've worked in social services for the last 28 years, primarily in Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, and I've focused that work on 28 years of homeless street outreach. And I come here today to warn you about the Housing First model. It was something that was introduced to us about 20 years ago, and to be blunt, it was a spectacular failure, and it is bankrupting our cities on the West Coast of the United States. At the time, we were excited. It looked good on paper. We were reading it like, this sounds amazing. But the biggest fault with the Housing First model is it doesn't prepare people to live in housing. And once they're there, it either hides the problem or they burn out faster to the streets. And it's really just caused a lot of problems in our communities. And what I ask you to do is rethink this. What we see now on the West Coast is shelter first, housing earned. Let them work towards that goal. You house them without any expectations towards recovery, either that be in addiction or mental health. They're highly likely to actually worsen and end up back on the streets. And so really for us, how it's devastated our communities is it's every year we ask for more and more money to cover the cost of this broken model.
15 seconds.
So all I'm asking is for you to rethink this model and just proceed with caution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move on to those who signed up online to speak online, beginning with Mike Vasilko, followed by Dolores Holmes, and then Leslie Williams. Is Mr. Vasilko on the Zoom? All right, so we'll move on then to Dolores Holmes, who will be followed by Leslie Williams and then Cindy Castro. Ms. Holmes? All right, then moving on to Leslie Williams, who will be followed by Cindy Castro and then Patrick Donnelly. There must be a really full Zoom somewhere else. So then we'll go on to Cindy Castro, followed by Patrick Donnelly, and then Jennifer Crosby.
Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Cindy Castro, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Mental Health Task Force of Evanston, and also the manager of the Outpatient Behavioral Health Clinic at Ascension St. Francis. Today, you received a letter submitted on behalf of the task force addressing our strong concerns regarding the limited funding for the City of Evanston's case management and safety net services grants and the process for allocation of grant funds. Funding for mental health is consistently seen as a priority for community residents. Many of you know that needs of our community are greater now more than ever. For this reason, providers who applied for funding and attended the Social Services Committee meeting on January 19th were surprised to hear the limited amount of dollars available for mental health funding and disappointed by the allocation process. If agencies had known of the significant funding shortfall, we could have sought out additional funding for those services. We also did not understand the allocation process, as it did not appear to be based on any type of consistent criteria. We were asking for communication and transparency on how the funding decisions were made. We recognize the difficult decisions the committee faced with limited funding and appreciate the commitment of those who are volunteering their time to serve the committee. We believe that both increased funding and a fair and equitable process are necessary to ensure that critical social services are available to meet the needs of Evanston's most under-resourced and vulnerable residents. We urge you to allocate $520,000 to the calendar year 2023 case management and safety net grants to fully fund the requests made, and review and improve the process for assessing grants, application, and awarding funds. Members of the task force would like to be a part of the conversation to partner and support city staff and the Social Services Committee in this process. We look forward to engaging in a meaningful conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Patrick Donnelly, who will be followed by Jennifer Crosby, and then Ms. Holmes, who I understand is now in the Zoom. Mr. Donnelly?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we sure can.
Thank you for having me, Mayor Biss and City Manager and City Council. I have with me a 1.5 minute really well-written presentation about Harley Clark that I'm going to completely disregard. Because when we're talking about Harley Clark, I think just quickly I want to say a billionaire couldn't save it. He walked away from it. And a New York Times bestseller, who also is very wealthy, just walked away from Harley Clark. And that's because this property has a lot of challenges. But we learned a lot about Harley Clark over the last 8 years. I mean, we've really studied this building and we really have some great solutions for it. we want to put a cafe in it and put event space in it and really open it up for the community. And we're hoping that city council, the new city council and the new city manager and our new mayor will at least meet with us so we can informally share with you all these great ideas we have and introduce you to some of the people who have done extraordinary work, like the person that helped build the Botanical Gardens and the former director of the Block Museum and people who sit on the board of Landmark, Illinois. We're working with some great people and we'd love to be a part of the Harley Clark conversation. So please include us, and we think it's a very important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jennifer Crosby, who will be followed by Dolores Holmes and then Jennifer Shader.
Oh, hi, good evening. I wanted to zoom in to just make a comment about the lodging establishments discussion that's going on. And I'm in full support of making sure that we license and inspect anything that has to do with cohabitation, especially if it has to deal with vulnerable populations like the disabled or seniors. But how I actually got on this is I thought that maybe this would have to do with some other types of housing ordinances. My concern is for the Airbnbs that are being run, especially in my neighborhood. When you have a hotel, there are, rules that you have to follow, like having a 24-hour desk clerk. You have to be 21 to rent the hotel room, all of these things that happen. But when there's an Airbnb, like the ones that are, next to my house, these are non-landlord occupied buildings that are being rented out basically as a hotel. And if I wanted to live next to a hotel, I would have bought a home in a zoning area that was, zoned for that. It's becoming a problem. I don't know who's going to this
15
neighborhood.
seconds.
There was a situation of a young man drinking, and the police basically said, well, you know what? If they rent a room for the night with Airbnb, they have all the rights as any citizen of Evanston to sit out in the lawn and drink. But we know that wouldn't happen at a Comfort Inn or any other place. So please consider starting to crack down on this.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Dolores Holmes, who will be followed by Jennifer Shader and then Cecile McHugh.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Clerk and City Council members. I just wanted to offer my support for Margarita Inn and Connections for much needed housing for our unhoused, some of our unhoused population here in Evanston. Then I just want to comment on our attitude as we Evanstonians. Sometimes we want everything. We have aspirations to do it all, as long as it's not in our own backyards. And so I'm saying that because sometimes we don't object when it's in someone else's backyard. And that would go the same, I want to say, concept or the same thinking for the rebuild of Bryan Stadium, that we need to look at the benefit for the overall community, not just for the 6th and 7th Ward. Yes, it's located there, but there are things located in other parts of the community that concerns you as well. So please think about the rest of us who may have some benefits from this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jennifer Shader, who will be followed by Cecile McHugh and then Evie Russell.
Thank you, Mayor Bess. Good evening, City Council members, City Manager Stowe, City Clerk Mendoza, and of course, Mayor Bess. I'm here on behalf of Friends of Harley Clark, a 501c3 that was formed in November of 2018 with a mission to preserve, maintain, and otherwise support the publicly owned Harley Clark House, Coach House, and grounds in strategic alliance with the community and city of Evanston. After Friends of Harley Clark was formed, we quickly raised over $50,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars in pledges, built relationships with preservation experts and vendors, and secured in-kind services for the purpose of several immediate and long-term preservation projects. While we paused our own fundraising efforts after the awarding of the lease, we're here today ready to resume our efforts wholeheartedly once again with funds available for immediate repairs. Friends of Harley Clark has always believed that we have an absolute gem in the making on our lakefront and that the possibilities are endless. To get there, we must work together. We encourage you to look at this transition as an opportunity to have the right entity in the house, one with a solid business plan and people with solid business acumen behind that plan. The right players at the right time with the right coaches will always lead to a successful outcome. Recently, the Evanston Conservancy reached out to us to let us know of their potential renewed interest in Harley Clark. We were
15
thrilled to
seconds.
hear of their continued commitment to the city of Evanston, our community, and the Harley Clark Mansion and grounds, and we're thrilled to hear that others are still interested as well. Even better, our understanding is that they're willing to collaborate with other parties that expressed interest during the RFP process and with Friends of Harley Clark to ensure that the 81% of our community that voted to save the house and gardens will not be disenfranchised. We could not be more encouraged to hear of their continued interest. And should the city
Thank you
choose
very
another
much.
path, we look forward to working together in partnership to ensure the preservation and future of the mansion, coach house, and grounds. Thank you so much, and we look
Thank you very
forward
much.
to the future.
The next speaker is Cecile McHugh, who will be followed by Evie Russell and then Doreen Price.
Go as fast as I can. If you could give me a little more time, I'd appreciate it because I have a preceding comment. I heard several times tonight comments that this proposed ordinance provides for licensing where none existed before. I'm quite sure all the lodging establishments already require licenses. That is what defines them. They need a license of some sort if they do not meet the 3-person rule. Okay? Correct me if I'm wrong, somebody. Going on to my comments. I'm surprised by the speed at which this proposed ordinance is progressing, presented to the public last Friday, especially surprised given its scope, replacing an entire chapter of the code affecting a good part of the city. Not provided is a description of the changes for each type of covered housing needed to understand the impact. Why was the entire chapter replaced instead of piecing in changes? It's necessary to know line for line why text was modified in order to understand effect. Example abbreviated, which rooms are to be occupied as sleeping rooms was deleted, yet the IPMC, which COE follows, contains special requirements for sleeping rooms. You can't pass through a bedroom to get to bathroom for egress, etc. Other details specific to sleeping rooms. Proposed ordinance repeats IPMC footage required for sleeping room, but doesn't state that all the IPMC requirements are to be met. Please consider that no limit has been placed on the number of rooming units on a lot.
15
Quick research
seconds.
shows Chicago. Did you say something? Timing me?
Yes, 15 seconds.
What about planned developments? At what point does shared housing containing rooming units become a planned development? This is a sweeping change that requires close examination, not yet done. The replacement chapter does not even define what shared housing is. Draft quality
Thank you very much.
Please examine in more detail before continuing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Evie Russell, who will be followed by Doreen Price.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Does increasing pollution, such as excessive light, noise, or chemicals, fit your green agenda for any part of Evanston? Increased traffic with more vehicle exhaust damages lungs and hearts. Increased noise levels cause anxiety, disrupt concentration and sleep, a major health concern. Frequent road and building construction releases pollutants into the air, soil, and water table, while creating noise, traffic disruption, and additional costs to the city. Huntington's proposals will not report on impacts related to noise levels, in-depth traffic impacts, streets and infrastructure deterioration, etc. Why support a study that ignores major environmental issues that will affect 2 wards directly and spill over to the rest of the city in terms of drifting pollution and costs? The environmental impact of the deconstruction and rebuild of an oversized stadium that does not provide enough parking and unused plans to increase traffic and congestion via its proposed zoning changes to allow unlimited 10K attendees events, coupled with allowed idling vehicles on the premises, is regressive. The destructive ramifications are to our health and to the health of the natural environment. Striving for environmental protection nowadays is an essential and existential issue and a
15
moral
seconds.
obligation. Huntington's insufficient proposal reveals a stance in favor of venues for profit entertainment aspirations. Be responsible. Ensure that an unbiased company conducts a fair, thorough study. And once the company is hired, send the bill to NU,
Time.
as the study is the necessary component to NU's pursuing construction and zoning permits.
Thank
It is
you very
ironic
much.
and tempting that NU's proposal, touted
Thank-
as a great benefit to Evanston,
Thank
should
you very
cost us
much.
100 grants. Thank you.
Thank you. The people who were passed over are Mike Vasilko and Leslie Williams, who I believe are still not in the Zoom. Is that correct? In that case, we move to our final public comment, which will be passed along to us by Clerk Mendoza.
Yes, Doreen Price.
I'm so sorry. I was looking at your name and anyhow. Sorry, just an error on my part. My apologies, Ms. Price. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Mr. Mayor and the City Council and Clerk Mendoza and City Council members, I would like to make this brief, which is helpful. It concerns, the Hunden concerns reflect opportunities regarding our priorities as a community. And the ones that were concerns were racism, and we believe out the well-building consultants. And so that's the background for which I'm saying, when will inclusion distinguish us as America's most livable city? Are there accommodations or new Evanston ordinances that can stop hate or racism? Can embracing our community, common humanity and nobility enhance inclusion to build community well-being and prosperity? This concerns our relationship with Northwestern and the whole community at large, to build wealth in a way that embraces everyone and helps everyone prosper. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks also for pointing out my mistake. I appreciate it. The final comment will be delivered by Clerk Mendoza.
Point of information. I believe our rules, just as not to set a precedent that the clerk is going to read out statements for folks, that our rules say that the clerk is not to read out statements and to only either provide a summary or just transmit it in writing to the council.
It was requested to do otherwise by a council member. I usually just forward emails to everyone. I think it's your responsibility as council members to read them. Majority of the people actually don't want me to read their statements. So I will do whatever this body decides.
Well, given, Clerk, that you generously enough reached out to all the people who emailed comments this week, I would respectfully recommend that you do read the comment of the person who
This person requested
who asked
for
their
the
comment to be
comment
read, and then we can all huddle and make sure that we're on the same page in advance of the next council meeting so that our expectations and the community's expectations are aligned.
Yes, I would appreciate that as the clerk. Dear Mayor Biss and City Council members, do you want to start my timer so we give everybody the same treatment?
Clerk Mendoza.
Dear Mayor Biss and City Council members, I'm writing this letter on behalf of the Evanston Conservancy. I am unable to attend the meeting this evening, but I am looking forward to having in-person conversations moving forward. As a refresh, we submitted a RFP for the Harley Clark Mansion in February of 2022 and had the second highest grade for the city. Since Artist Bookhouse has elected to discontinue with their plans, we are hopeful that the city would reconsider our proposal. During the past week, I have reached out to and had productive conversations with Evanston Lake House and Gardens, as well as Charles Smith and Jens Jensen's Gardens. I believe if given the chance, we could all work together in a positive way that would be beneficial to both the city and the community. I know Charles is anticipating a lease from the city for the grounds, coach house, and greenhouse. We would support this decision if the lease would then be subjected to the master lease at a future date. If the city was inclined to move forward with Evanston Conservancy, I know Jen Jensen's Gardens has upcoming deadlines that are tied.
15 seconds.
that are tied to having long-time use of the gardens. I do not want to impede that progress and believe it is all for good, sorry. I would also like to emphasize our commitment to the community engagement and collaboration. Our team is dedicated to working closely with the residents, and continues.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Kelly?
I just wanted to clarify, I was the council member because I had a couple of residents ask me, unless I'm mistaken in the rules, it was pointed out to me that it says individuals may participate by electronic means, including the person may submit written comment in advance of the meeting, and it will be read during public comment within the time parameters set forth here. So, I mean, maybe we need to change that.
Yeah, and I, as the clerk of the city, I always reach out to individuals and ask them if they want me to read their public comment out loud. To be honest with you, most people just want to be able to email you. And most of the people who want their comments read out loud, they will email me and specifically tell me, or they will call, or.
Right, it's just it's just the rule. I think we might just want to clarify it, or maybe tweak that.
All right, so let's move on and again make sure we're all on the same page before next time. This brings us to special orders of business. Is there a motion relative to item SP1?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move item SP1, ordinance 4-0-23, amending the portions of Title V, Chapter 2, lodging establishments of the City Code.
I'll second.
Councilmember Nusma moves approval of ordinance 4-0-23. Councilmember Nguyen seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Council, I'm going to have to vamp for a second here while I reset the timer. Councilmember Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you. As I expressed in P&D, I would like to see us table this since we're no longer as rushed. My understanding from staff was that we're trying to fit this on the timetable for Connections for the Homeless. I have a lot of questions. I think we are moving too quickly on this. I think licensing is very controversial. I'd like to echo what we heard from Gail Schechter. And I do have a lot of concerns about how the potential disparate impact, the impact on fair housing, the facility that Ms. Schechter runs home in Chicago, that would be subject co-housing. I mean, it doesn't even say co-housing in the description of the facilities. There's a long explanation about co-housing in this, but yet it's not even listed in the facilities covered under the license, the catch-all licensing for shared housing. I mean, I would be concerned that we would, feel compelled, that we would then have to license this co-housing arrangement. I just think we're moving I think there are too many questions about this, and it's we should slow down, and since we can, I think we should. I wonder is Sarah or somebody could answer a question. I'm just wondering if there are other cities that do this, meaning that license a catch-all bunch of facilities, but each one is subject to a separate operating agreement, meaning like, for example, all transitional shelters, each one would be a separate operating agreement, because that's what we're saying we're going to do is create these tailored operating agreements. So it could be unequal, it could be unfair even in that situation. I mean, why wouldn't we have a license for each that's standardized? I just would love to hear of other cities that are doing something like this in terms of licensing.
Mr. Cummings?
I just wanted to point out for the council that we already require a license under the current code. We're amending the code to make it stronger, but it's not a new chapter of the city code. We are amending the existing code. So it's not as though we're trying to create a whole new license at all. It's already required. We're trying to strengthen the existence of our current code so that we can actually enforce it better and fix some of the issues that have been debated at various committees and subcommittees for some time.
Thank you. But I mean, we do have, there is certain, so for example, transitional shelter. I mean, now we're putting everything under the same license, and then we're going to have separate operating agreements for every single, say, for example, transitional shelter, and those could vary and be unequal. Currently, I mean, I just would like to know if there's another city that does it like this, because it does seem to me almost like an overreach that we're going to create these separate operating agreements for the same types of facility. Each one's going to get an individualized operating agreement because the license is the same for a hotel as it is for, say, a transitional treatment shelter. So can someone just identify another city that's following the same model for me?
Good evening, Mayor Biss, members of the City Council, Clerk Mendoza. We have not found any community that or municipality that is regulating things in this exact manner. There are any number of communities that have individual licenses for things as they come up, but what that doesn't give us is the ability to respond to new things as they come up with a platform from which to work. And the other thing that I think we are seeing that's happening more and more is different physical buildings are being used in different ways at different times to house people differently. And this gives us the flexibility to focus on how the housing is provided, the operating, which has not been something in the past. In the past, you pretty much rented a standalone dwelling unit, or you owned a standalone dwelling unit, or there were some very specific types of housing, shared housing that existed, like rooming houses in the typical way, that fit under what we had. But the changes that are going on in the way people are being housed, and the much greater mobility of a lot of people is making them look for new and different options that this gives us the ability to address.
Thank you.
Councilmember Reed, followed by Ravel.
Thank you. So I don't agree with Councilmember Kelly. We often agree on things, but in this case, certainly this did not go through committee process, but it's having two readings here at council. It was discussed at committee this evening, and so that's somewhat in line with the normal process. I think the concerns that I'm hearing can be addressed and answered between, this will have a second reading, and maybe if those questions aren't answered by the next reading, I think maybe there would be potential for more support around a hold for one meeting to get those answers. But one question I do have is, and one note I have here is, about folks saying that this process is rushed, and I'd love to think that this council were, as people are describing, almost like we're in the pocket of big homeless shelter, and that's almost something to be proud of. If this council is is extremely influenced by homeless shelters and ensuring that they're here in our community. I don't think that's the case. I don't think we're deviating from standard process for any particular applicant. I think this is, smart policy that should be applied elsewhere, I'll note. One thing I do have a question about is the license, and I'm sorry if I'm just not reading the plain language and seeing it here, but one thing that was mentioned that I thought had some value earlier was that the operational agreement isn't required until 6 months after, the license has been issued. Is that correct? Can somebody correct the record on that? Council Cummings or Elizabeth?
Good evening, Liz Williams. So the current requirement related to the operating agreement is that if you are an existing licensed facility, that your operating agreement would be due upon your renewal application in 2024. Any new license requests from existing license holders, new requests for licenses require a operating agreement to be approved by the city council prior to the license issuance.
Okay, so that was something mistaken in public comment when someone said that.
Correct. I think what may have been conflated is related to the other item, which was withheld from this evening's agenda.
Okay, so that's helpful, and hope that clarifies. I forget exactly who asked that question, but hopefully that clarifies that issue. And I will say in response to, and last thing here, you know, I think it makes sense that we have these operational agreements for individual, you know, just like as Councilmember Kelly said, you know, we're licensing hotels, dormitories, you know, shelters, you know, the whole gambit that's included here, you know, rooming houses. And so it makes sense that each of those would have their own challenges and problems. They're in different neighborhoods, they're different configurations. To me, it makes sense that we'd have an operational agreement for each one that really hones in on the local issues and operating challenges of that particular site and industry. And so to me, that perfectly makes sense. But I would encourage, you know, all of those questions to be answered before the next meeting. And if they aren't thoroughly answered, I'd be more open to holding. Thank you.
Councilmember Revelle, followed by Nusma.
So the examples of shared housing on the first page of this document that we're given earlier this evening, do all of those currently have operating agreements? So, or a lot of them don't. So, yeah.
Currently, no license holder has an operating agreement. That is one of the new proposed amendments to the license requirement. So this is a new requirement of all license holders.
Okay. But presumably they have something similar to an operating agreement?
They actually do not. They are subject to the current requirements of the rooming house license code.
Okay.
Which is one of the motivations behind making these proposed changes.
Right, okay. And so have we thought about, like, length of time we would give to all these existing shared housing facilities to provide, you know, to work on an operating agreement?
Sure. So as Councilmember Reed had asked for clarification, existing license holders will be required to submit an operating agreement with their 2024 renewal.
Okay, got it, yeah.
And then any new license requests between now and into the future would be required to have those approved by the city council.
Right, okay. I apologize for making you
No,
repeat
that's
it.
okay.
It's taking a while to sort of simmer and sit.
Happy to do so.
Okay. Right, well, I mean, there have definitely been some questions raised this evening, and I guess I would encourage all of us, as well as members of the public who've been participating this evening, to submit those questions so we can have them answered by the time we come back to talk about this in a couple of weeks.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilmember Nusma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to speak to the speed of this process and reiterate that this is not a rushed process. I've been involved in a discussion about how to appropriately license facilities in the city going back to at least March of last year. So that's almost a full year. The way that discussion has evolved is where we are now, and I think this is really kind of an elegant and creative solution to what is really kind of a thorny problem. How do we regulate a really diverse and complex array of potential housing structures as simply as possible? And, you know, credit to our staff for coming up with this elegant solution to a complex problem. I think this is great. This is an example of good government, and this is an example that other cities might want to take note of. So if we're the first one in the country, so be it. Everybody look at Evanston. I think we're doing the right thing here. And we've had a pretty in-depth discussion an hour and a half ago at P&D, so I'm looking forward to voting on this and moving forward with our agenda tonight.
Seeing that no one is requesting to speak for the first time, we go back to Council Member Kelly for a second time with 2 minutes and 10 seconds left.
Thank you. Again, a special order of business is to try to push things through more quickly, so I don't think that our residents are given a fair chance to really understand this. I'm grateful to Sarah Flax this evening for producing a clearer document. It's been very difficult for many to understand what was going on here, so I don't think this is fair to put this through as a special order. There is time. And again, to me, Councilmember Reed, to your point, responding to you, when you have, normally you would have a license that sets standards for all of the facilities of that certain type. So for all dormitories, for all hotels, so that there is a standard and some equity in terms of the expectations and standards. So now, I mean, this to me feels not only unwieldy, but again, like now everybody's gonna have the same license and we're gonna write individual operating agreements, individual ones for every rooming house, for every hotel, they're gonna get a separate one. I just think we need to better assess the impact of this. I'm also, I am not particularly, the whole licensing concept, I think that needs further to be fleshed out further with our residents because it is a very controversial issue, licensing. As Ms. Schechter pointed out, she doesn't need to license, and this type of co-housing is more popular among lower income, elderly, disabled, so they would be subject to licensing, whereas in other situations that we spoke about in P&D, it would not. So I think there is a possibility for a disparate impact. I just think we need to look at this in more detail and not take action and then final action in 2 weeks. I think this, we should have the opportunity to meet with our residents, to talk about it, to study it, and not rush this through as a special order. Thank you.
Again, no one is asking to speak for the first time, so we go back to Council Member Reed with 1:55 left.
Thank you. I see that as important, so I'll ask Councilor Cummings, from your understanding of this ordinance, would housing situations, as Councilmember Kelly described, repeating what Gail Schechter mentioned earlier, would those be covered by this ordinance?
I'm not sure exactly which housing situations you're talking about. So based upon the definition that we have in both our zoning code that talks about what a rooming unit and lodging rooms are, it would cover those specific definitions in our zoning code as well as the definition of shared housing that's in the updated portion of the code. I don't believe there will be any sort of disparate impact between housing that houses elderly or disabled or anything of that nature. As the city requires a license already. So if there was a disparate impact, it would exist already. What we're trying to do is to strengthen our code so that we can actually have better enforcement mechanisms to protect those people who are residents of those facilities. It has come before this council about issues in terms of all sorts of kinds of housing, dealing with Northwestern students, for example. Licensing of this nature would actually help us with that as well. So I don't see that there's any sort of disparate impact or fair housing potential negative impact from Fair Housing Act, but I certainly will. We'll follow the will of the council and how they want to go with this.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Well, not that I would request that, along with Councilmember Kelly, that we look into that between now and the next meeting, and if there is if there's logic for excluding those, that intergenerational kind of housing, co-housing model that was mentioned, if there's logic for excluding that, I'd want to make sure that it is excluded and that is very clear in our language. And other than that, I'm not hearing other, and then, of course, I'd love to, look into, make sure that we don't have fair housing concerns. But with those two things in mind, I think if we get answers on that, we're in a good place. Thank you.
Seeing that no one is asking to speak for a first or second time, we go back to Councilmember Kelly with 15 seconds left.
So, I mean, of course we have licensing for healthcare, and we want that. And but it's the other type of housing that we're talking about, and we need to have it. And now that healthcare and everything is going to be under that same, umbrella of licensing. So this is a special order. I would hold it tonight, but I can't because this has been placed as a special order business. So I don't think that was, I just want to state my objection again to having this placed as a special order business. The best we could do would be to table it this evening so we can get more answers as opposed to seeing this rush through. There's no other city doing this. It's been stated tonight, no one else is doing this. This needs to be looked at far more carefully. Thank you.
Seeing no one else seeking to speak, would the clerk please take the roll on the motion to approve ordinance 4-0-23?
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Hadagaris?
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly?
No.
Councilmember Harris? Councilmember Nguyen? Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
With 7 voting in favor and 1 voting against, the motion carries and the item is passed and will be on the February 27th agenda for action. This brings us now to item SP2. Would someone like to make a motion to initiate a discussion relative to item SP2?
I will move discussion of item SP2, a discussion regarding the use of 2603 Sheridan Road, commonly known as the Harley Clark Mansion.
Councilmember Reed moves for discussion of item SP2. Councilmember Harris seconds. I see Mr. Cummings is before us.
Good evening, members of City Council. Nicholas Cummings, Corporation Counsel. Just wanted to clarify some of the comments that have been made in public comment at this meeting and previous. This matter is before you tonight because as the city's lawyer, it's my responsibility to actually seek guidance from my client. The Administration and Public Works Committee did give staff direction to negotiate a lease with Jens Jensen and to bring that lease back so that it could be voted on by City Council. However, at no point has staff received direction as to what the city wants in that lease. The only thing that we've been given is a lease drafted by the tenant and an opportunity to comment on that lease as staff. Staff doesn't own the property. The corporate authorities, who are the stewards of the city on behalf of the residents, own the property. So it's not up to staff to determine what to do with the property. It's up to you. And I had not an opportunity to talk to all of you to find out what we want in that lease. So that's why it's on discussion tonight as a special order of business, because I would not be doing my job. I'd be probably committing malpractice if I didn't come talk to you to find out what we wanted in that lease. So the memorandum that's placed before you asks some questions that came up as staff concerns as to what we wanted to do with the lease, what the city wants to do with the lease. It's very rare that the tenant dictates the terms of a lease. The owner tends to dictate the terms of the lease. So we are asking the corporate authorities this evening to tell staff what they want in the lease so that we can negotiate that lease with Jens Jensen. It's not an opportunity to try and not give Jens Jensen a lease, but there are a lot of questions that City Council has not had an opportunity to answer, such as, does the city want to bifurcate the property? If it causes harm to an opportunity to try and do something with the mansion? Does the city want to put out another RFP? All of these things have not been considered by this body in order for us to try and negotiate a lease. So that is what we are hoping to discuss this evening. Included in the packet is an exhibit of the survey of the property. Contrary to popular belief, you will see in the packet there's a blue marking which was meant to be the leasehold for Artist Bookhouse. But if you read the legal description, it actually includes the entirety of lots 9, 10, and 11, which is in the packet. So we would need an entirely new legal description to try and make sure that we actually accurately lease the correct property. Additionally, Kate Sterling from our Community Development Department has also provided other opportunities in the packet. So we just like some direction from City Council in which direction they would like us to go. Happy to draft the lease and work with Jens Jensen to get those terms together in time for the deadline that was presented to us of February 27th.
Thank you. Councilmember Reed, followed by Ravel.
Thank you, Council Cummings. I appreciate your diligence on this item. However, I do believe, and so we're here, we'll have the discussion. I think it's worthwhile. But I will say that, the committee, the Administration and Public Works Committee took action to vote on moving forward with the lease with the Jens Jensen Garden Group. I think that and I want to say this, I don't want to be too dramatic with this, but I do think it undermines our process to have a committee, and I'm not really saying this to you, Nick, although I'm facing you, but I think it undermines, and so I'm really saying this to my colleagues here, that I think we should have a discussion about this. I think it's worthwhile to get the feedback of everyone on this, but I do think that the committee took an action, and it would undermine our process, it would undermine our democratic values in the legislative process to not allow that committee's direction to move forward and then have it come to council, and we can take a vote here on that, and if it fails here, if it passes here, that's the process. But I wouldn't want us to stray too far from that, because we took an action, we put a belief out into the community, and I think that we should let that take hold, and that part of the process play out. However, to where we are now, I think the direction that I recall from Administration of Public Works was to, and I'm looking at Exhibit 20 or 20223. Is this from the packet, right? Is that? I'm sorry, I'm holding this up. No. That is. Okay, and this is from the Jens Jensen Garden Group.
Yes,
that's where I received it. So to me, this looks like this is what they're looking for. This aligns with what I believed we'd be turning over, for the non-exclusive use of the lands. And so, my direction stands at what it was at Administration and Public Works. I think it's worthwhile to have a discussion about the House, certainly by granting licensure to, a lease or licensure, whatever, to the Jens Jensen Garden Group, that would change opportunities for someone to both manage the house and the grounds, but I can't, I think it makes sense to do this. There are a lot of city properties where we do not expect the tenant to manage the grounds. I don't think we should do that here. We have a group who, I'd still want to see the financial plans. Am I nearing my time?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. I still would love to see the fundraising plans and, have the group go through everything they'd have to go through if there was an RFP for this. But, I think we should move forward with the process that we laid out. And I'll reserve time to respond to questions later. Thank you.
Mayor Biss, if I may.
Please.
Councilmember Reed raises some very good points. The Administration and Public Works Committee did give staff direction to negotiate a lease. But for the first time tonight, I have heard that the idea of non-exclusive use of the land and the idea that the financial and fundraising plan should be part of that lease. And so that's the type of direction that I asked for this to be a discussion item to get tonight, so that we could actually have that in the lease, because the lease that's in the packet that was presented to us from Jens Jensen asked for exclusive use of the property. And without having that direction from the corporate authorities, I would be irresponsible for staff to go in and negotiate that blindly.
Councilmember Ravel, and just for my own bookkeeping, Councilmember Kelly, was that a light or a? Okay, so Councilmember Ravel.
I wish I had re-listened to the recording for the ANPW meeting. My recollection was there was going to be the mediation process between Bookhouse and Jens Jensen that was going to lead to the lease for Jens Jensen.
That was the meeting before last meeting.
Was that okay? Because I thought somehow that was that was before Artist Bookhouse said they were going to be leaving. Well, since this item has been placed on the agenda tonight, of course, we have received now 4 different expressions of interest in the mansion or the property or some version thereof. And 3 of those groups were groups that had submitted proposals before, Evanston Lake House and Gardens, the Evanston Conservancy, and then the One Community Museum. And I think there seems to be interest among at least the Lake House and Gardens and the Conservancy in working together, including working with Jens Jensen Gardens. And then we have a new proposal, a new concept, which is very, needs a lot further discussion, and it's quite different from the others, a Center for Climate Action that would be a public-private partnership between the city and Northwestern's Institute for Sustainability and Energy. So I would like us to have a conversation about the whole property and not move forward yet with a bifurcated proposal for a separate lease with Jens Jensen. I think it sounds, certainly from the interest of a couple of the groups, that Jens Jensen would be part of what they would, how they would move forward. But I would like us to take some time to hear more from, for example, Lake House and Gardens and the Conservancy. If they really are going to put together a joint proposal, I'd like to see what that's going to look like. So I would like us to have a couple, give these various groups 2 months maybe to work together and come together with a more formal proposals for us to consider, so we make a decision about the property as a whole.
Councilmember Kelly, followed by Burns.
So I just want to, I'm referencing the 2 letters, the one sent by the Evanston Lake House and Gardens and the other one by the Conservancy, both stating that they'd like to see a lease move forward for the Jens Jensen Gardens. I'm also concerned about the legislative process, that we did give instructions to create a lease for the grounds, the coach house and the grotto, and that was supposed to come back, and then we would vote on that, and then we would have this discussion here, and that could be, then we could either vote it down or vote it up, or we could amend it. So I feel like that's the process that needs to carry forward. I feel like it's being thwarted this evening. So I think that needs to go forward. And again, anything can happen here once it comes back, but it's supposed to work it out so that all the legalese are taken care of in agreement with the Jens Jensen Garden Group. That was the instruction. So I just ask that we let that play out. And again, it can be amended, it can be voted down, and we can continue to solicit, I agree with you, Alderman Raval, to work with the groups that have, made amazing proposals for the House. Nothing precludes that here with following our legislative process, the democratic legislative process that has already begun in APW. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, may I respond?
Go ahead.
Respectfully, once the lease is crafted and brought to this body, it would be irresponsible to try and renegotiate that lease from the dais. We've had this conversation with other leases, or not leases, but other contracts, where we tried to change the terms or wanted to amend the contract that was before the body. At that point, it's too late. I need that feedback now in order to try and negotiate with Jens Jensen beforehand, rather than bringing the lease to you incomplete without feedback from the entire body and trying to amend it after the fact. It's not, I certainly respect the democratic process. This is why it's on discussion for tonight, so that I can get direction and staff can get direction in how we want to move forward with this lease.
Councilmember Burns, followed by Newsmith, followed by Wynn.
Dealing with this process just comes to mind. I'm thinking less about the lease, and I do think it's important for us to take a moment to think about process for the reasons that have been described. And I don't think it's out of order for us to be discussing it. And in fact, I took a little peek. I appreciate that it is on for discussion and not introduction or action. I think then it would in some ways, some sense, be inappropriate. I think probably what should have been done at APW is that, hopefully next time staff feels comfortable coming to APW and just saying, look, we would feel a lot more comfortable if we got direction from the full council and not just a committee. I think that would have been appropriate, and then we could have considered that at APW and made that decision. And because I understand, like, you want the APW, I think, what is it, 4 of us on APW? 5? You know, you might get different feedback if you discuss it with the full body, so I can certainly understand that. I think because clear direction, I believe clear direction was given, there should have been a good faith attempt to try to come up with some lease, because that was the direction of the committee. If I think if staff needed more information, it should have sought that from that committee. But I don't think this is out of order. So I just want to use this as an opportunity to kind of partner with staff up here to figure out how we can address this next time. But yeah, I think if direction was needed, if additional direction was needed, I think based on where it's at right now, that direction should have been given, provided by APW. And if you wanted to seek direction from the full body, I think that request should have just been made at APW, and we could have took action on it.
That request was made prior to the APW meeting on the 28th, and actually was even discussed with the proposed tenant. However, it came to APW anyway, and that direction was given. And I certainly respect that, and that an attempt should have been made to negotiate a lease. It was not clear direction given, unfortunately, though, at APW as to what to put in the lease. And so the only lease that we had was one that was requested by the tenant. Someone requested the tenant have a lease drafted. And so the only idea we had was what the tenant had drafted. And we knew that it wouldn't be the same as Artist Bookhouse lease. But that's why we're here asking the questions that are in the memo. Do we want fundraising goals? Do we want exclusive use of the property? Do we want the property to be leased for $1 but still allow for revenue by this nonprofit? Like, these are the questions that we need to ask in order for us to draft a competent lease.
Councilmember Nusma, followed by Nguyen, followed by Hedekaris, followed by Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure where to begin here. Yeah, this is not the discussion that anyone up here or in the audience wanted to be having. Yeah, but nonetheless, we find ourselves here, and I've made it clear, I think, that at the end of this process, if all goes well, that we will have a place for the Jensen Group. Given the amount of time and effort they've put into this project, we'd be foolish not to, find a way to include them if we can. Technically, I think what they voted A&PW was to negotiate a lease, not to execute a lease. And I'm really sympathetic to Councilmember Ravel's position about not wanting to bifurcate at this point, because right now we're talking about one piece of a pizza. We have the whole pizza to sell. And as I've used this analogy with some other folks, I would rather try and sell a whole pizza than a pizza that has one piece already taken out of it. We've got somebody lined up for that one piece, and that's great. So I'm wondering if the middle road here is to perhaps negotiate a lease with the Jensen Group, but hold off on signing that until we've gone through another process of hearing from, hearing proposals from folks who want the entire property, or want the building at least, I should say, the mansion. Throwing that out as a suggestion. I'm not sure if that's a good idea or not. That's all for now.
Councilmember Nguyen, followed by Hedekaris, followed by Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the questions that the staff has asked in the memo for this are all questions that I would want to have answers to before I went forward with agreeing to vote yes on any lease. They're all very appropriate. They're the types of questions that we asked of the applicants that we looked at for the Harley Clark Mansion. And so I agree with Councilmember Ravel that we need some time to think this over. The facts have just changed on us really dramatically, and we're back to, even before Eleanor Ravel was on the council. And I remember those days. So but we have some good, good entities that are coming forward. I think we have to start, we're really starting almost from scratch again, but we know a lot more information than we did before. And certainly, I would be interested in having Jens Jensen Gardens be a part of the whole picture going forward. But I think that we don't give ourselves the proper opportunity to look at this from the standpoint of the whole picture, or the whole pizza, as Jonathan says, if we move forward with just one portion of this. That's not what we did before. What we did before was we moved forward with the house with the idea that the gardens would be a sublet, a sublease of some sort. I think we want to make sure the house is the primary goal here, and then that obviously the gardens are an important secondary portion of this. But we need to hear from people who are just learning, like a month later, that guess what? Harley Clark is open again. So I would like us to slow this process down and make sure that we're turning all the stones over and making sure that we're dealing with this with as much information as we can get.
Mr. Mayor, I certainly hear the comments from Councilmember Nguyen and Nuzma and Ravel. However, staff has received direction from the AP&W committee, so we have to come back with a lease on the 27th. And so if we can, I have a couple of notes from Councilmember Reed's comments. If there are other items that the council, from the memo that the council wants to address, we can actually make sure that those are incorporated before re-engaging with the Jens Jensen Gardens group, so that we can actually have a draft before the council, or at least before AP&W on the 27th.
Councilmember Hadakatis, followed by Harris.
Council Cummings, just one quick clarification. Could you clarify when you say exclusive use and your concerns with that language in the lease?
Certainly. So right now, the city is, from my understanding and talking to Parks and Recreation Director Audrey Thompson, they may host programs on the property. And so if the tenant has exclusive use of the property, the city then needs to sort of alert or otherwise seek permission to host those programs on the property. So again, it depends on how we draft it. We can say, we need to give you so much notice, we're going to use the property, but remember that we're the owner, we're going to use the property. But the way that the leases that have been previously given, starting back in the fall, were very tenant friendly, as opposed to being, owner friendly.
Okay. I just want to state just that I'm in support of the Jens Jensen Garden and having the bifurcated property around the mansion. So Council Cummings, would it be helpful if we did a straw poll on the points that you need clarification from, so that you can proceed with, since we are moving forward based on the AP&W decision, would that help you if you did a straw poll, if you could provide us like the key talking points that you need?
Sure.
Guidance from?
That would be helpful, if the mayor is in agreement with such a straw poll.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I would maybe recommend, given that you may not guess it, given how many people have spoken so far, there's actually still a long queue. I'd recommend that we allow the discussion to continue and then conduct a straw poll at the end. Councilmember Hadakatis, are you? Councilmember Harris.
Thank you so much, and I am hopeful and grateful for the conversation. But I too, like Councilmember Ravel, got lost somewhere in the shuffle. And remember, the last thing we talked about was the mediation, and so there's clearly confusion up here. I don't think that is the fault of staff. I think we were confused on where we were, what we were going to do. I do want this to be executed, but as I'm going to always say, we have to set standards and we have to have excellence in everything that we do. So I want it done right. I don't want it done fast. I don't want it done slow. I want it done right, and whatever that looks like. So thank you.
So seeing that no one is seeking to speak for the first time, which you can tell because everyone's already spoken once, we'll go back to those of you who've requested a second crack, beginning with Councilmember Reed with 1:35 left.
Thank you. This is interesting what draws comments from everyone on the council, the issues that we all. I just want to remind us that this is, or what I'm seeking to happen is non-exclusive use of the grounds. Which means, and I want to make it clear that the grounds would be open to the public, that city could use it, that the folks operating the mansion could use the grounds at their pleasure, just like any member of the public. I guess, except for during the hours that normal parks would be closed, it'd be operated just like a normal park. And I wish that more neighbors would choose to adopt parks and then for free make investments in the parks and make the parks more livable, and particularly with the goals of honoring and keeping the legacy of someone like Jens Jensen, who had, even though this has been discussed for years, really got to learn more about him and his process over the last few months. And I just want to note to the pizza metaphor here, it's easy to sell a pizza that doesn't have a slice taken out, but it's easier to sell a normal size pizza than the world's biggest pizza. And I think when we include the grounds, we're making this unwieldy for anyone to really take over. And as has been noted by folks, Councilmember Nguyen noted this and others, that in the Artist Book House and other proposals, folks have put forward having to sublease out the grounds. So why would we even want to put that burden on someone? We can figure out the grounds and then certainly turn over the house to whatever use we see appropriate. So I'd encourage us. I appreciate Council Cummings and Councilmember Herrick. Yes, my time is up and I will end now. Councilmember Herrick Carr's suggestion, the straw poll. I think we need to move forward with the process that APW started, and if folks have reservations, we'll certainly have an opportunity to address that at another point. Thank you.
Councilmember Revelle with 2.5 minutes left.
Well, I guess I'm really stuck on needing to, that we're concerned about the legislative process vis-a-vis the direction from ANPW. I think the council as a whole are the stewards for the Harley Clark property as a whole, and it would have been up to us as a whole body to direct Corporation Council to work on a lease. So I am not comfortable. If we're going to do straw polls, I'd rather do a straw poll on whether to go ahead with a bifurcated approach. But in terms of some things where I would like to have some input from the eventual entity that's going to be responsible for the main house, the Jens Jensen proposed lease talks about fundraising events. Well, how many? Because I would assume who might be in the big house is going to want some fundraising events. So there need to be some coordination and definition between the two entities. And lessee may rent the premises to third parties for events and educational use. Well, that might be a main focus of the entity that wants the main house. So, I mean, I just don't, I think moving ahead with the Jens Jensen lease is really complicated if we don't know what the uses might be of the entity that's going to assume responsibility for the full mansion.
So one of the entities that submitted public comment called for the lease to Jens Jensen, but that lease be subservient to any primary tenant of the house.
So how would that work?
We would have to get creative with drafting. But nevertheless, if that's something that this body is interested in to address those concerns, again, that's information that we can use as staff that would say, you have this lease, but if we lease the house, your lease is going to be, sort of secondary to whoever has the house, if that's what this body wants to happen. And that's the kind of information that I would need in order to successfully draft a lease.
Councilmember Kelly with 3 minutes and 45 seconds left.
First, I just want to clarify, I think maybe Councilmember Nguyen mentioned that it was premature to bring back a signed lease. We don't bring back a signed lease. We just bring back the lease, and then if it's approved, then it goes and it gets signed, just to make, for the public. Okay, and then, right, I just want to make sure that I figured. And then with regard to the Conservancy that said they absolutely want to see the Jen Jensen Gardens lease go forward, they don't want to impede that. It seems to me that there could be a clause, should the Conservancy secure the lease, that this would be a component of that particular group. So I think there's many ways to go forward with this, and I think that's it. So I hope we can move this back to APW. And again, I like what Councilmember Hedakaris' idea, that we can add some element for to help you with the lease. I also think, I wonder if we should, ask the tenant, the proposed tenant, to comment. I think there were some, Charles, I guess regarding like the cities, I think the city, it's already in there, right, that the city would always have access to veto any activities, or could you address, I mean, there were some concerns about access to the grounds in the city's control.
Well, I've been working, oh my gosh, actually, I've been involved in those grounds and on the behalf and with the city for 30 years, actually, but intensively for about the last 4 or 5 years. So I've been down there every day working with the Ecology Center, working with the Greenways people, facilities, Parks and Rec. I just wasn't running around that site, willy-nilly all on my own. Everything that I did, before it used to be with Paul D'Agostino. And there's also a body called the Lighthouse Landings Complex Committee, which is made up of a bunch of groups that all have interest in the site, including the Lighthouse Park District. So it was always a matter of coordination. It was always a matter of getting permission from city staff and working with city staff in everything I did. And I tell you, on that garden, I maybe spent like over $40,000, okay? Not to mention thousands of hours of time over the last 3.5 years. So I'm very aware of the level of cooperation and access that's needed. I've talked with this many times with Parks and Rec. But I think that one of the most important things is this is the lease. We were asked to bring a lease to the city. This is just a document, right? And the point is, it's a starting point. And there have been comments made about the content of the lease. Well, normally, I don't know if it's normal. My attorneys, Kirkland and Ellis, one of the best law firms, if not the best law firm in Chicago. I sent them the list. They said, well, request that the lease be marked up with the items of the list so that they can be addressed in a formal way. But there's two kinds of conversation. One is the legalese and all the stuff that goes in the lease. But let me just, in this idea of exclusive use, there's the comment that's being referred to is leasees shall have the exclusive right to use the premises for all lawful purposes and will operate the premises as a community center within the definition of the city code, section 618.3, by providing a facility that is open to the public and is used without limitation for community recreation, gardening, landscaping, conservation, ecological and nature education, events and activities and fundraising. The definition, the city's definition of a community center is a place, structure, or area or other facility that is open to the public under jurisdiction of a public or nonprofit agency and is used for community recreation, education, and/or service activities. A community center may include, but is not limited to, the following, and it goes through the list. So the intention is to operate this space like a public park. The other thing that I think is important to be aware of is, it says, Jensen Gardens will maintain a calendar for use of the lawn areas. Priority will be given to JJGE and the Ecology Center, who is the other user of this space. All other users must be pre-approved by JJGE to be added to a calendar. But it says, and these are the third parties, Third-party users must get a special event permit from the City of Evanston. Third-party users must comply with laws of the State of Illinois and the City of Evanston and any and all rules set forth by Parks, Recreation, and Community Service Department. So all these agencies have to do all the things that they would do on any other lakefront space. They said third-party users must all have required permits and licenses, which they get from the city. They pay the city and get the permit. They apply to the city. Event operation in some cases, insurance may be required. And in most cases, there is some insurance required by third parties, which would be verified by the city because they have to go through the process with the city. So off-site parking and shuttle services might be an option in some cases. I've worked this out before to make sure it's possible. Orrington School parking lot is available for free during summer. So this is a really well thought out process over a long period of time. And I also have to add that back before the Bookhouse signed the lease, because Jens Jensen was a party to the lease, we were required to provide a construction schedule, a fundraising schedule. We were required to provide a construction budget, which was developed by W.B. Olson. We have preliminary floor plans that were done by Eifler and Associates. So we have done all of this stuff. So we're just not like some fly-by-night group that's jumping here trying to take something from the city. We're trying to provide something to the city that's high quality and funded by philanthropy. And I think that, and I have to state the difference is that there are certain, sometimes when you want to go in higher quality things, it's something that you wouldn't expect taxpayers to cover. And we want to do something that's really, really nice. And therefore, we need to have the coach house as a center of operations. So it's like our church, you know. It's the place where we congregate. It's the place where we bring people in and train them. It's the place where we bring together all the other Stewart programs that are keeping Evanston green and beautiful. And they would all work out of this site. And I know them all. Most of them are on the board of directors of Jens Jensen Gardens. So all I'm saying is I can't imagine that this kind of thing, this kind of operation wouldn't be a fantastic example and wouldn't be for the quality that we would expect in a mansion. And I think that anybody who would be interested in a mansion would actually be incredibly thrilled to have this kind of thing around them for their enjoyment, their access, and of course, fundraising. They want to do. And I just think that we have done our homework, and it's come over a long period of time. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I just do want to say really quickly, I just want to express deep gratitude because we've talked a lot about this and gone back and forth, but I just thank you, Mr. Smith, for your incredible hard work, labor, expertise, fundraising. To think what it might look like had you not been on those grounds working and creating a community effort. So thank you so much.
Mr. Mayor, what's kind of concerning, in the copy of the lease is attached as a part of the packet, some of the requirements that were just read to you about uses and calendars and those types of things are not presently in the lease.
Because we haven't had a chance to put them in the lease.
You drafted the lease.
All right, I think we're going to bring this to a close. So the next person, the next person seeking to speak is Councilmember Burns, who has 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm still just stuck on process. I mean, I understand the judgment and the consideration that went into wanting the full body to weigh in on this. I think the thing that I keep going back and forth in my mind about is, most of what we do, unless it's exempted from, unless we can discuss it in closed sessions, it starts off in draft mode, right, and works its way through the process. And so all of what you're requesting from the full body now would have eventually, this same body would have had an opportunity to weigh in at a later point. And this could feel to the community as if we're kind of we're leaping ahead before allowing the standing committee, to weigh in on this issue. And so I think that's the only thing that I keep going back and forth with in terms of what is the best process. And I think next time, if we want these type of leases to go to the full body, then, maybe, the mayor as chair can special order of business like we've done before. Like this is really important. What'd you say? No, I'm saying even for introduction, like to take more official action on it. Like this is such an important thing. I think now it's on for discussion. Like this is such an important thing that we want to remove this out of the standing committee because we want the full council to weigh in on it. That's not what we've done to date. And so I think at the very least, we should have had a similar item on at APW tonight. That's where I want to really close it. I just reviewed it again, and I didn't see anything on it. And so I think that committee gave clear direction. And instead of even something going back tonight, maybe it could have been an item on the APW agenda as well as on the council agenda. But we didn't have anything, we didn't even get an update at APW, and then we've had this discussion tonight. So I think at the very least, there should have been some discussion at APW about this. Hey, you know what? We tried to work out a lease. There's still some more information we need. We're going to take it to council to get some of that discussion, some of that feedback, and then, we'll bring it back to this committee. So just thoughts on process. Like I said, that's the only thing I'm still mulling over. But I understand that, again, the judgment that went into wanting to, get feedback from the full body, and I think it was the right one.
Councilmember Nusma with 3.5 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are we operating under any kind of written agreement with Jens Jensen at the moment?
It's not to my understanding. They had an agreement with Artist Bookhouse, and I don't know where that stands now that Artist Bookhouse is terminating their lease.
Okay.
And I was actually informed that the city actually has to terminate their lease because the lease doesn't have a clause for them to terminate the lease. So the city, well, I guess, will take those steps as part of trying to culminate this lease with Jens Jensen Gardens. But it's not my understanding that there's a formal agreement in place currently.
Okay, thank you. So if my math is correct, Mr. Smith has been doing work on the gardens at the property for 34 years or thereabouts. You said 30 plus 4 without any kind of agreement. Right, and that's probably not a good thing. We do want an agreement. There needs to be something in writing between our two parties to protect both of us. So I'm just wondering, if it's been 30 years plus 4 more recently, can we not wait another 2 months to see what happens with the rest of the property before we move ahead with this?
To Councilmember Burns' point, I have direction. I got to have a lease. I'm trying to figure out the terms that the city wants in that lease tonight. I certainly respect that, there's a bigger process that the council may want to consider, but there was not an opportunity for closed session, anything like that. So
this takes me back to, I think you used the word subservient clause or something like that. I had
Subservient lease.
A subservient lease. If we're forced by an action of AP&W to move ahead with the lease, I would only be comfortable signing that lease if it allowed us the flexibility we needed while the rest of the process plays out. If that's a subservient clause or whatever the creative language you were thinking about putting together. So I hope that's, at least from one council member, some actionable feedback.
Councilmember Nguyen with 2:40 left.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that a number of items have just come up in that Mr. Smith was discussing that are not in the lease that I would want to make sure are in the lease. I would review the video and just have all of those things that Mr. Smith just mentioned that are not in that lease has to be in this lease. I think it has to be non-exclusive use. We need to understand what non-exclusive means. Can people come and sit down and have a picnic there and treat it just like a public park? then we need to understand how many special events would be there, because we do limit the number of special events along the lakefront. We need to figure out what is the fundraising of Jens Jensen and Gardens, if they have a projection of that. I'd like to know what that is. Any of the other materials that Mr. Smith mentioned that he already has in his possession, I'd like to see that as part of the packet with the next one. I don't think we should do any more negotiating of the lease up here from the dais tonight. I think we should all just list what we have, and if my list wasn't complete, I think you should submit more information to Mr. Cummings, and then we should move forward.
Well, speaking of moving forward, no one is requesting to speak for a first or second time, so we'll go to third cracks, beginning with Councilmember Ravel with a minute left.
Okay, just real briefly, I was going to call on Councilmember Nguyen if she can help me remember, but when we talked about Harley, when I first came on the council way back in 2016, and we started talking about what to do about Harley Clark, the discussion was always by the council as a whole. I don't think it ever went into one of the standing committees and then came to the council, so that's why.
That's correct.
That's why I'm kind of stuck on where the decision-making should be about this.
Councilmember Ravel, you are correct. We had all of our discussions about Harley Clark as special orders of business at the council as a whole. A number of times we had special meetings just entirely on Harley Clark.
Councilmember Kelly with 2 minutes left.
So with regard to, I think what Jonathan mentioned about subservient lease, I would say yes, but according to whoever should secure the lease to the house. I would say according to that, like, for example, the Conservancy made that clear, but the other group seemed perfectly fine with having the two separate leases. So I would say however you can write that, so according to, the will or the interest of the organization that would secure the house. And I also want to say, so there were clearly some flaws in the way, we're seeing now that things weren't ironed out, like with regard to the Jens Jensen Gardens, that needed to be, so maybe this is a stronger way forward as opposed to the way the last council went forward with this. I think it'll be really nice for everybody to know that these historic, beautiful gardens that mean so much are in good hands as we move forward this time. So I think this is looking positive. Thank you.
Councilmember Reed is next. Your time is up. You want 15 seconds? All right.
I'll reserve my 15 seconds if I need to, that you graciously granted me.
I didn't say they're transferable. Then in that case, next is Councilmember Newsma with 2:15 left.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we're getting into the details here. I want to make it fairly clear that, we're leasing the buildings, the coach house and the greenhouse, right? The grounds themselves, are they a part of the lease or not? If they're part of the lease, I want them to remain as, for all intents and purposes, be a park as they are now.
So the request of the tenant is to lease the grounds, which would require us to take the survey they've completed and actually have someone write a legal description for it for us to put in the lease. Our city code requires any lease over 20 years to have a legal description. So we would take that survey, which actually I think Councilmember Reed has it. It covers the coach house, the grounds, and write that lease accordingly based upon
Right. And
that.
so the point I want to make is by leasing the grounds to the Jensen Group, that does not give them control over who can have a picnic. Right. It's the same as if we go to the beach. It's the same as if we go to James Park from a resident perspective going to visit that property.
We can ensure that the lease would be that way, yes.
Right. Doesn't give the residents free access inside the greenhouse.
Correct.
That they have exclusive use of the greenhouse. But okay. That's all for now.
Next is Councilmember Burns with 30 seconds left.
I just wanted to make sure that both my colleagues, I believe, understand this already, but for the public, because there's been a lot shared up here today, is that, again, the normal process, which this is on, allows for amendments. So I don't want, there's been some language up here, it's like this is the last opportunity to, well, if ABW is going to discuss this like this, then we're going to, it's the normal process. Like, we can make amendments at any point, and as Councilmember Kelly said, we could even vote it down if there's support to do that. I do also want to say that I would imagine, because this item is going to the full body, that we have the power to remove something from a committee. I don't know how often that happens, if at all, but I think just what I'm looking for is more decisive action from the council. If it would like to move in a certain direction, that we just take official action and do that, and then that also will provide more clear direction for staff in the future. So that's all. Just talking process tonight.
Okay. Well, that concludes the comments. We had talked about doing a straw poll. Just before we do that, just, what's that? Oh. Oh.
I have copious notes.
All right. Well, with 30 seconds left, Councilmember Ravel.
I just not quite sure when to say this. I mean, I want to think that we're finished with the discussion about the Jens Jensen lease part, but I guess what kind of message do we want to send to the 4 groups that have sent us expressions of interest mainly for the mansion, and in particular the Center for Climate Action? Do we want to encourage that group to flesh out their proposal and come to us? I don't want people to do a couple of months of work and not have us be interested. So I don't, maybe that's a straw poll.
Do you want to use your 15 seconds now, Councilmember?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I think that's a wonderful question to ask, because I think we're not just giving direction on the lease, we're giving the point of this discussion is further on. So I would say I think we should do an RFP, or we should begin the process for an RFP for the house, for the mansion itself. Or maybe something a little less formal, but I think an RFP process or something adjacent to it makes sense.
Well, I mean, I certainly agree with that. And I also agree that we should, let me just say this as directly as possible. I do not believe we are in a position to be turning down interest on this situation that we find ourselves in. And so my view, which I think was sort of the body language up here, was if folks are interested, we should make it clear that we're interested in hearing all ideas. Just before we move on, I want to say that I think I think this discussion was a real vindication of staff's request to have this special order of business created. There's clearly a real diversity of views here. It's not a normal lease, right? This is a lease that gets a lot more kind of public interest than almost any other that we would consider. And we're divided. I think that's an honest characterization. And so for a lease to arrive fully negotiated based upon input from 5 council members and the counterparty, and then show up here dead on arrival would not have been in anyone's best interest. My own view is we need to act in such a way as to keep our options as open as possible, that we shouldn't take decisions now that will close doors, because again, we're in a tricky situation and we want to leave as many options available to us as we try to reach favorable resolution for the whole community. And I hope we don't put ourselves into a corner that forestalls potentially exciting options down the road. Thank you to everyone for a very robust discussion. Thank you to the community input. Thank you to staff for all the work you're putting into this, and clearly more to come. This brings us now to item SP3. Would someone care to make a motion relative to item SP3?
I will move item SP3. Sorry, I don't have the ordinance number in front of me.
Mr. Chair, I'll move item SP3, ordinance 13-0-23, amending portions of Title IX, Chapter 5, general offenses of the city code.
Second.
Councilmember Newsome moves approval of ordinance 13-0-23. Councilmember Reed seconds. This is for final action. Councilmember Reed.
Yes, thank you. So we had folks come up during public comment who made notes on regulations relating to cannabis consumption in our city. They compared this to another ordinance that will be coming before us soon, which is cannabis consumption lounges. And so one of the things that they noted at the Human Services Committee was that, there's strong, at least from these groups, there's strong opposition to cannabis consumption lounges. This ordinance, and they also recommend that we should mirror our ordinances relating to the use of tobacco, that our cannabis use and tobacco use should be mirrored. That's a correct. And so I had conversations with the groups, and so there's a recommendation, particularly since we don't allow cannabis consumption lounges now, that we would allow open air consumption of cannabis. That would be better than a consumption lounge. Is that correct? So I don't think there's support on this council to allow open air consumption of cannabis, although that would meet the goals of our Clean Air Act, because there's open air consumption of tobacco, and that again diverts folks away from consuming inside. And so as we adopt this, I think it's important to remember that we have a legal substance in cannabis that we do not allow folks to consume outdoors. Similar to alcohol, we don't allow folks to consume alcohol outdoors. But we do allow folks to consume alcohol in the privacy of their own home and in a bar. With cannabis, the only place that someone could consume legally is in the privacy of their own home. And that is still indoors, and that is still in a place that does not have air filtration like cannabis consumption lounges. Now, unless there is appetite to allow open air consumption of cannabis, then maybe we can reconsider. I would reconsider my support of cannabis consumption lounges, but until we get to that point, I think we need to, just want to note this here as we're on this. And then lastly, had a lot of great conversations with our police department, got to work really closely with Chief Stewart and particularly Sergeant Safier on this ordinance. There is still one place of where I just want to flag my concern, which is, and I have an email set up here. I did some ahead prep work, where in section B, again, this is relating to the consumption of, or the possession of open containers of alcohol. We don't allow folks, it was added back in by an amendment of Councilmember Nusma, that open containers of alcoholic beverages would not be allowed in public buildings, parks, beaches, highways, streets, alleys, sidewalks, parkways, public parking lots. I just want to note with that by putting that language in there, we are undermining the language that we amended, and I think that the police department supported, that this council supports, that would allow people to transport alcohol in their trunk, right? It's currently allowed under state law that folks could put a previously open container of alcohol in their trunk or in the non-passenger portion of their vehicle and drive with it. That's fine. That's part of the amendment here. But now we're saying you can put it in your trunk, but the second your vehicle goes onto any of our streets, our alley, our highways, or any public parking lot, you're now in violation of the law. So you can put it in your trunk, but then your car can't go onto a public street with that alcohol in your car because you'd then be violating this ordinance. My suggestion would be that we would add in the language, just add in, no person shall loiter, shall have on his or her possession, property or personal property, open containers of alcoholic beverages and all of this stuff, but they couldn't loiter with it. So you can possess it and you can move, but you can't stop and stand around and potentially consume. Is that my time up? Okay, well, I will wrap up here. And so I would move that we would add in, and I'll send this now, but loiter. That way our police department can still, and there isn't necessarily agreement on this, but our police department would still be able to move along folks who are with open containers of alcohol, but they would only be able to arrest or fine folks if they stuck around and they loitered with open containers.
While the amendment is being prepared, Mr. Cummings?
I just wanted to clarify, A1, Section A1 of this particular ordinance deals with possession of alcohol in the motor vehicle, and that A2 deals with consumption and possession of alcohol, although it doesn't say it in the title, outside of a motor vehicle. And so I think that goes to the point that Councilmember is trying to add in terms of loitering. I just wanted to make sure the council wasn't conflating the two sections. We tried to, and if we need to make it even more clear, we tried to make it clear that one section dealt with whatever's in your car, and then the other section dealt with whatever's on your person, and not necessarily in the car. So I just want to make sure that was clear.
Just a point of information, as far as the way courts would look at this, even if I have it in my possession in my car, it's still in my personal possession, correct? Constructive possession?
So, yes, however, the court would look at Section A1 to deal with the car. If you were in your car, the court would not look at A2. It would only be the court would only look at A2 if you were walking around in the Civic Center, for example, on your person.
Councilmember Revelle.
Well, given how much time Sergeant Safier has spent on this back and forth with Councilmember Reed, I'm hesitant to have us make further changes without Sergeant Safier here.
My time is expired. Councilmember Wynn.
Councilmember Wynn.
Well, I am prepared to vote yes on the ordinance that we have in our packet, but as Alderman Revelle said, every other time this has come before us, we've had Sergeant Safier here to provide us with the police perspective on this. So I don't think that we should make any changes in this without Sergeant Safier being here. But as I said, I am prepared to vote yes on the ordinance that's in the packet tonight.
Councilmember Hadakatis.
Just for everyone's information, I met with Sergeant Safier this morning about a different issue, and I asked them about this item, and they are in support as the way it's written currently. So, just so everyone knows.
So
15-second rule?
It's not 15-second rule, 15-second exception.
All right. Thank you. So I'll wrap up. I will not make this amendment now. If I think we should clarify that, if we're allowing, I will just say and wrap up in my 15 seconds. If we're allowing folks to have open containers in the non-passenger portion of their vehicle, I think it makes sense to allow folks to have these open containers on their person as long as it's not as long as they're not consuming it in public. I am just noting for the record my position or my concern about this one particular point. I worked very long with Council Cummings and Sergeant Safier and everyone else and Allison and Councilmember Burns on this. So I'm fine being 95% of the way there, 96% of the way there. So this is okay, but I do think we should clarify that, and we can maybe leave that to another date. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, will the clerk please take the roll on the motion, which is to pass ordinance 13-0-23 as it appears in the packet with no amendment.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakatis?
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly? Councilmember Harris? Councilmember Wynn? Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Revelle?
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries, and ordinance 13-0-23 is passed. This brings us to the consent agenda. I was told to remove item A3 from the consent agenda because it did not pass council. I was also told to draw attention to the fact that there's a proposal that item A24 have introduction and action. If someone would like to have me remove that from the consent agenda as well, I'm happy to do so. Okay. So items A3 and A24 are removed from the consent agenda. Are there any further removals from the consent agenda people would see?
SS1.
SS1.
A1.
A1.
ED1.
ED1. So at this time we have A1, A3, A24, SS1, and ED1. Is there any further item folks would like to see removed? Going once? Going twice? Councilmember, are you okay for me to go on, or are you still? Okay. So would someone care to make a motion then?
Mr. Chair, I'll move passage of the consent agenda, which does not include items A1, A3, A24, SS1, ED1, and that's it.
Second.
Councilmember Nusma, having taken excellent notes, moves the passage of the consent agenda with the exception of the following 5 items: A1, A3, A24, SS1, and ED1. Councilmember Harris seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris?
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly? Councilmember Harris?
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn?
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns? Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
With 7 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries, and the consent agenda, except for those 5 items, is passed. This brings us to item A1. Councilmember Harris, would you care to make a motion here?
I move for the approval of the City of Evanston payroll bills list and credit card activity.
Is there a second?
Second.
Councilmember Harris moves approval of the City of Evanston payroll bills list and credit card activity. Councilmember Reed seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris?
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly? Aye. Councilmember Harris?
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn? Aye. Councilmember Nusma?
Abstain.
Councilmember Burns? Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
With 6 voting in favor, none voting against, and 1 abstention, the motion carries, and the payroll bills list and credit card activity are approved. This brings us now to item A24. Councilmember Harris, would you care to make a motion to suspend the rules so that introduction and action can both occur tonight?
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Harris moves suspension of the rules to allow for ordinance 16-0-23 to receive a single vote for introduction and action tonight. Councilmember Wynn seconds. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk please take the roll on the motion to suspend the rules? Sorry, my time's up.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris?
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly? Aye. Councilmember Harris?
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn? Aye. Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns? Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
With 7 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries and the rules are suspended. Now, Councilmember Harris, would you care to make a motion on this item for introduction and action?
Yes. I move for ordinance 16-023, authorizing the city manager to execute documents related to funding of the 1909 intake replacement project for the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency Public Water Supply Loan Program.
Second.
Councilmember Harris moves introduction and action of ordinance 16-023. Councilmember Wynn seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris?
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly? Councilmember Harris? Aye. Councilmember Wynn? Aye. Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns? Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
With 7 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries, and ordinance 16-0-23 is passed. This brings us to item SS1. Would someone care to make a motion on item SS1?
I will move item SS1, approval of fiscal year 2023 public service funding allocations, including case management, safety net, and support services.
Second.
Councilmember Hadakatis moves approval of the FY23 public services funding allocations, including case management, safety net, and support services. Councilmember Harris seconds. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Nusma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to send this back to the Social Services Committee to have another look, and I believe the correct action would be to make a motion to send this back to Social Services Committee.
Councilmember Nusma moves to refer this item back to the Social Services Committee. Is there a second? Councilmember Revelle seconds. Is there any discussion on that motion? Councilmember Reed.
Yes, thank you. As a member of the Social Services Committee, I can't speak for the committee. I don't know if we want this back. I think this is here for, I mean, it's been sent back to committee once before. I think as far as we can get with the process, I think we've gotten there. We have made, there were some changes to the process. There are certainly, there's a need for continued improvement to the process for next year, but I think we should look at a long-term strategy for improving the process. My recommendation would be that, if we're going to do something with this, I think holding it here or, I think it needs to stay here if we're going to have further deliberation on this. And my recommendation would be to go with some version of what was requested in the letter that Clerk Mendoza sent to us earlier, right? You sent that to us, yeah, from the Mental Health Task Force. And I've had conversations with the Mental Health Task Force. I sat in with not Sarah, but Sarah's team on a meeting with the Mental Health Task Force. So, like as I said, I think we need to really, what should be sent to and what is going to the next Social Services Committee is a review, correct, of the process that we had this year, not reviewing these particular allocations, but I think we're going to get feedback from some of the key stakeholders at the next Social Services Committee. So I would ask that maybe that motion be withdrawn if the maker sees fit after discussion. And, my alternative would be that we, again, either hold it here or we find some funding to add additional resources, particularly to the providers that are most financially challenged and could use, there's some folks who received, far less than what they requested, and we're overall about $500,000 short. If we were to give everyone the full dollar amount that they requested, I would support that. I don't know if that's the direction that the full body wants to go, but what I do think is we can certainly make some improvements now, which is increasing the funding for now and then looking toward next year for a better process. Thank you.
Councilmember Hadakatis, followed by Burns.
Director Flax, can you please speak to some of the funding challenges we're seeing here? I too spoke with some members of the Mental Health Task Force about their concerns, and just where exactly is our shortfall, and are there any ways we can find this funding going forward?
Well, the staff doesn't have any way of finding the money, but I can tell you some of the challenges, and they are significant, and the committee worked very, very hard on this. This is absolutely true. There are a number of key things. First of all, we had moved to this new system of funding right before the pandemic hit, but the idea that had been brought forward to the council was to focus our resources on our residents with greatest needs who didn't have the capacity to get the services that they needed to basically move themselves into self-sufficiency and to improve their lives. And the way of addressing that was to provide robust case management, wraparound services, also provided both through the negotiations and the ability of the organizations providing case management services, but also by funding support services. And the first support services that we are doing that with is the mental health services that were recently approved, and that was the funding that was sent back that Councilmember Reed referred to. And then the third category of funding is the safety net category, which is to keep people to take care of an immediate need and keep people from falling into greater economic hardship or other hardship. This year, in 2023, we got substantially larger requests both from renewing agencies, and then we also had 2 new applications in each category. Not surprising. I mean, it's good that we have more organizations wanting to work with the city on this approach to funding things. But it was a little overwhelming. To give you a little perspective, the case management requests were 48% increase from what we were able to actually give out in 2022. Now, one of the challenges in looking at our numbers is in both 2020, in 2021, we originally allocated the funding, and we were doing this 2-year sort of soft approval. We were planning on, and in 2022, we looked at how everybody was doing and basically went ahead and funded them. We did not do a new application. So we were trying to commit to the organizations that we're working with because we are asking them to provide services in a way that's different from what they had done in the past, which was to come and ask us for money to do what they were doing well for the residents, but not this targeted approach. So in 2022, because our nonprofits were hit really hard by the pandemic, obviously, some of them had not fully implemented their programming and had even been having trouble getting staff. So we carried over, if you will, quite a bit of money in the case management area. We carried over $52,500, and in the safety net services, it was $158,500. And those were all given to agencies, but they hadn't expended them, so they were carrying it over into the next year. So we didn't fund them at the same level in 2022 because of that carryover. So it's incredibly hard to understand what was actually allocated in what year and what was spent in what year. But as a result, it made it very difficult for the committee to look at what had the organizations we'd been funding, had they delivered on their, what they said they would do if they were given this money. And I don't believe there was a great deal of discussion about what would happen if they were reduced, if their funding was reduced substantially. So what can happen sometimes, it's very hard to make these decisions. I worked with the Housing and Community Development Act Committee on the same sort of thing for many, many years, and I always remember our chair saying, this is a very difficult decision, always. We always have more good things to fund than we have money to fund. And how to do that is the challenge. And functionally what happened, I think, is to include the new applicants who obviously must have had I did not read them all in the detail that I usually did this year, but had really strong applications and all that good stuff. So this is good work. It's work we want to support, but we really cut up the amount of funding that everybody was given. And I think it's going to make it difficult for some of the organizations that have been working with us for the past 2 years to continue their same level of services. And in some cases, I don't know if it was really determined if the new agencies, given smaller amounts of money, substantially smaller, would be able to deliver on what they proposed when they asked for the main amount. So those really are the challenges. And if you have any questions, I'll certainly try to answer them, but I hope that gives some explanation. But the mental health services in this particular round could have been applied for, and some did apply for them. In fact, Impact Behavioral Health was a new applicant, and they were awarded funding. There were a number of mental health agencies that didn't apply at all, and I'm hearing that everybody says they need more funding, regardless of whether they've been one of the funders that one of the agencies we've been funding for their programming in the past 2 years, or if they're looking for money new. It's very challenging because not only our needs still high, but inflation has had a real factor on what everybody can do. So I hope that helps explain the situation.
Councilmember Hadakadas, you still have the floor.
Okay. Director Flax, one last question. I just want to know how the timing of us approving this affects the funding. Typically, what's our timing for providing this money to these agencies?
In the last 2 years, if we were to allocate it tonight, we would be ahead of our last 2-year schedules. We have been trying to, that was one of the purposes of combining the two sources of funding too, so we could actually get money out the door sooner, because we have our local funding. If we were to hold this and actually reconsider it in some way, shape, or form, regardless of whether it was done by the Social Services Committee or some other way, it would not make us, we would be at least as early and probably earlier than the past 2 years in allocating funds.
Okay, great, thank you. I would urge us to consider maybe, I know ARPA funding is going away, but if there's a way to maybe provide this as a stopgap to provide funding for some of our long-term partners that we're coming up a little bit short with, that's something I would maybe like to see, but I'll cede the floor.
Councilmember Burns.
My recollection of the conversation at Social Services Committee is I think a lot of the agencies were shocked that there wasn't as much money as they thought it would be. I think people came into the process thinking that they would receive either exactly what they requested or something close to it, because maybe that's how it happened in previous years. I don't know. And what I told the agencies that reached out to me is the Social Service Committee, which I sit on the Social Services Committee, we understood the entire time that we did not have enough money to meet everyone's expectations. That was very clear. I don't know if we made that clear enough to the agencies. So that's probably a something that we can learn moving forward, is just to be very upfront about that, because we knew pretty early on, just based on how many people applied and what they requested, that we weren't going to have enough money. So I think just probably getting that out earlier would help next time. But I do think the work has been done. I did not make it for the full meeting, so I ended up abstaining from the vote, but I was present for enough of the meeting to know that there was a lot of time and effort put into trying to figure out how to fairly distribute the resources to all the different groups. Again, knowing that there just wouldn't be enough to allocate the amounts that were requested. And I don't think it would help to bring it back to the group, because they already put a lot of time and effort and labor into trying to figure it out, and this was what they came up with. I think this was their kind of their good faith kind of attempt to try to reconcile these issues with funding. And so I agree. I think with what I've heard up here is that I think the main question is, do we want to allocate additional funding to cover the remaining requests? And Councilman Herdicata suggested potentially using ARPA. I don't know if that was for all of the requests or just a subset of the some of the agencies. But I do think that is really the matter before us, is if we want to allocate additional resources. I don't think it would help to bring it back to the group unless we provided clear direction that we want them to we want the Social Services Committee to rethink the process entirely, rescore everybody, because that's what we would have to do, right? And I don't think that it makes sense to do that. So I think really the question before us is whether or not we want to allocate additional resources to covering the remaining requests. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
No one is requesting to speak for a first time, so we go back to Councilmember Reed with 2.5 minutes left.
Yeah, I'll just double down and say that I hope that we can move forward here. The motion hasn't been removed yet, so I don't know I guess the motion isn't going to be removed. The goal is to send it back. If that's the case, I'm a no vote on sending it back to committee. To just add to what Councilmember Burns said, what really needs to be done at committee is, and there was a good faith effort put forward, but we need a rubric at the Social Services Committee to really, really gauge how we prioritize certain applicants over others. We had a process, and it was very subjective to the individual member of the committee. We kind of just went through a spreadsheet and said, how much money do we think should be allocated? It really would take, I think, more information than what we were provided to make a truly informed decision. I think, again, good faith effort. And I think the process of creating a rubric, which is necessary for this process, is not something we can get done, not a thoughtful, detailed rubric in a short amount of time. I think it's going to take a few months for us to work with providers and work this through committee to get a thoughtful rubric for next year. So I would support Councilmember Hedekadis's suggestion that maybe we look at ARPA. I'm supportive of the full dollar amount. Maybe it's $250,000 from ARPA. I believe there was, what was it, Sarah? There's 200 some odd thousand left over for mental health funding in ARPA, unused.
There's no official money in ARPA for mental health funding that has not been allocated. There's a little, I should have this number ingrained in my brain, but I don't, a little over $5 million that is left in total to be reallocated.
Okay. My apologies. I thought at some point I heard that there was some dollar amount of mental health funding that we had set aside that hadn't been allocated. But again, I still think we can find some money in ARPA for mental health. It's one of the, one of the lasting effects of COVID, or I think one of the longest lasting effects of COVID will be, the mental health impact on individuals and the community as a whole. And so I think this is something for us to prioritize.
Councilmember Ravel.
So what would be the process for us moving forward with making a decision about ARPA, dedicating some ARPA funds for the mental health support services?
If I could, one of the things that I would want clarification on is I don't think that this is limited to the mental health service providers.
That's what I was just about to say.
Okay.
I was going to ask for point of information. That's not, the groups that we did not fund, we did not necessarily request, did not state that they would request mental health service as a part of the services. So I don't think it's that simple. And I don't know if we have a list of some of those groups, but yeah, it wasn't restricted to mental health services.
Well, I have the list in front of me, and it's actually the list of agencies or the programs they applied for. I mean, we have 2 new organizations applying for case management services, and then the new organizations for a safety net was Child Care Network is a mental health services application. And Infant Welfare Society is not specifically a mental health program. So I don't want to look at this as solving the issues of the mental health services providers.
Once again, no one is asking to speak for the first time, so we go back to Councilmember Hedekadis with 355 left. And it's weird how much 355 rendered poorly looks like BIS.
So, the last thing I'd want to do is to ask our partners to do more work. Is it possible for us to reevaluate this in a couple months after, allocate the funds and maybe go back to the agencies and see where they're at? We might have a clear picture there. I'd still, want to see where we're at with ARPA for the other pieces. But has there been thought, Director Flax, to doing like a 6-month or a check-in with these? Typically, how do we find out how they're doing with funding from us?
With this new cycle, this new process we've gone to, we have been saying that for the case management and safety net services, the goal is to look at it as a sort of a 2-year commitment, subject to the agencies providing statistics showing that they're doing the work that they said they would do. So I think it's difficult, especially with the case management, because the whole point of that is long-term case management. And if you don't have some kind of a commitment to maintaining those services, then the agencies really don't have the opportunity to work with the individuals or households. There's a trust building stabilization process. There's the building the case management plan. With them, we have very stringent requirements. They're supposed to meet at least once a month, and they have to, this is very robust case management. So that one, I think, is a very difficult thing to do on a short-term basis because it counters the whole purpose of that approach to funding. I'm also just trying to add up, because I wanted to give the committee, and I will do this just in a minute, what the difference is between what was requested and what we allocated. So I just want to do that math for you.
I think it's about 517,000, somewhere around there.
Something like that. Let me just make sure.
Councilmember Hadakaris, is that the end of your?
I get 478,000 because I'm not taking into account the money that had been set aside for additional supportive services, which was 122,773. Now, we could also, we just recently started those services, and it's arguable that we could say that we ought to be able to get through at least 1 year with the 250, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was significantly more than that amount that was allocated. Is just really getting off the ground now. So that still won't make up the difference, but it's some additional funding.
So once again, no one is asking to speak for the first time, so we go back to Councilmember Revelle with 4 minutes and 48 seconds left.
All right. Do we have any extra money in our Human Services Fund? Our city
that
budget?
I do not know. I don't keep an eye on that. Generally, it is not allocated absolutely to the fullest, but I honestly don't know. That's certainly something we can look into.
I mean, because I'm getting a sense, at least from those of us who are jumping back and forth into the conversation, that we would like to find more funding.
And that is indeed the largest source of this funding. So I can certainly look into that and talk to Hitesh and talk to Ike.
So at this time, no one else is asking to speak. So will the clerk please take the roll on the motion to refer this back to the Social Services Committee?
Councilmember Reed?
No.
Councilmember Hadakaris?
No.
Councilmember Kelly? Councilmember Harris?
Yes.
Councilmember Nusma?
Yes.
Councilmember Nguyen? Yes. Councilmember Burns?
No.
Councilmember Revelle?
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Well, this is exciting. With 4 voting in favor and 4 voting against, I slip out of irrelevance for a brief moment. I am going to break the tie by voting no, and just in the interest of clarity, especially since the item is still there for live. I was persuaded by Councilmember Burns' point that the solution to what I think many of us agree is a real problem isn't to just ping pong this back to the committee with the same kind of resource situation. I would be sympathetic to tabling this for a while to figure out a better solution, but I think kicking it back to the volunteer residents without help on where to find the money that we're all looking to spend is kind of unfair to them. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no, oh, Councilmember Hadakis.
I just think, I just want to say, I think we're all committed to finding a way to bridge this gap. So I encourage staff to, and I'm available to, I don't know how it would help for the financial piece, but yeah, I think we're all looking forward to finding a way to bridge a gap for some of these partners of ours.
I do have a request, even that I think could be helpful, and that is, I mean, we have some, the agencies, for example, that propose new programs and received awards of like $20,000. I think it would be appropriate for staff to contact them and find out if that is something they can do anything with, because honestly, if we were to go from, say, feeling that we have to make up the full amount for that to make them whole or make them able to launch a new program or to effectively do the new programs, I think that would be an important thing for us to know. So I'd like to, if with the approval of the council, be able to talk to them openly and just be straight with them and say, you know, because I do know in the past years we managed to give people, organizations, money that was too little for them to effectively use, and they ended up spending more time and energy trying to figure out what to do with it or reporting to us, as we require quite a bit of reporting on this. So and that's only for agencies. I'm not saying it rules them out. I just want to at least say what is a meaningful amount of funding that would allow this proposal of yours to go forward.
That's exactly the kind of conversation that should have been had at the Social Services Committee, which is now not going back to.
It's very difficult sometimes, I think, in those meetings. And we did have a internal, we were going to also bring this, and it is going to be discussed at the next social services meetings. And I got to tell you, there's one thing that I think is really hard to do in a Zoom meeting, and that is this kind of very, very important interaction. And it makes it very hard to, again, back to the old CDBG days, we had everybody there. And when we made these sorts of the funding decisions, where various of the committee would say, I need to be able to ask this organization if they can even do anything with this money. And that's really hard to do on a Zoom meeting. And I think it's a pretty overwhelming responsibility when you already, as Councilmember Burns said, you know you don't have enough money, and it makes it that much harder. So that's just one way to, I think we can at least try to figure out what would be needed to move these funding things forward.
Councilmember Reed with 15 seconds left.
Yes. Is this the exception, or is this just regular 15? All right, so I'll take it as 30. All right, so I would recommend, I would move that we table this to, I mean, I don't know what a reasonable amount of time, you know, whether it's one meeting or two meetings for you, Sarah, to have those conversations. I think particularly focusing on the new programs. I think that's where I heard a lot of frustration, particularly with the newer programs. Taking that time to have those conversations, and then coming back to us with maybe, you know, I would also, so I'd move that we table this for one meeting. Does that sound reasonable, or do you need two?
For one council meeting?
Yeah, one council meeting. Two?
I think probably two would be better. It's
Okay,
a pretty major job.
Okay, I move that we table this until what is two council meetings from now? The first meeting in March?
March 13th.
March 13th. I move that we table this until March 13th. I would like staff to come, you know, I don't know if this is officially a part of the motion, so I'm looking for reactions from people's faces, but I think finding, you know, up to $250,000 in ARPA, if possible, to help bridge the gap, particularly for the new programs that only receive $20,000. And also, if the programs think that they can't make much of a difference with just $20,000, maybe some of them will willingly kind of bow out and reapply next year with hopefully a better process. Maybe, maybe not.
So I'm going to render this as Councilmember Reed moves that this item be tabled to the March 13th City Council meeting with the request that staff both work through some of the questions that Director Flax mentioned and explore other funding options, including ARPA funding.
And the health department budget as well, or the Human Services Fund, yes.
Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Councilmember Newsome seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Harris. Councilmember Nguyen.
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, my brief moment of relevance has faded. The motion passes, and this item will be back on the agenda 4 weeks from today. And thank you very much.
Thank you for the direction. It will help us a great deal in approaching this, because the committee did work very, very hard, and I agree that we do not want to make them feel that all that labor was for nothing. Thank you.
This brings us to item ED1. Is there a motion on item ED1?
I move for the approval of the contract of Glance Design to provide website development and logo design services for the Legacy Business Program, RFP 2259.
Second.
Councilmember Harris moves approval of a contract with Glance Design as described in item ED1. Councilmember Newsome seconds. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I pulled this off. I'm going to be voting yes, so don't worry. But I just want to make sure I'm, as folks know, all for trying new things, and so my concern is I just want to have clear metrics with this. I mentioned this at Economic Development. I don't know if Paul is here, but I just want to make sure that as we're embarking on this, that there are clear metrics to, see the effectiveness of this in the long term. And that's all I wanted to highlight. I'm a bit skeptical of this program in and of itself. Sorry, just the website is what I'm a bit skeptical of the efficacy on helping us retain our legacy businesses. It seems more like feel good than actual change, but there are more programs coming down the pike that I may or may not be supportive of, and so I just want to highlight that, and also thank you, Councilmember Kelly, for trying something new and somewhat out of the box for our community. That's it's always a good direction to try something new and learn from our successes and failures. So thank you.
Councilmember Kelly.
Thank you, Councilmember Reed. And I do love the idea. I'm glad you put the metrics in there. I think that's an absolute must. And I think we will see very positive metrics just based on some sort of similar kind of experience. But it goes way beyond just a website. This also will be plaques or flags. It'll be, newsletters. It's programs. It's so much for this price. So I think we're going to find a really wonderful impact that will, in the end, be a relatively small expense to support hundreds. We're well over 200 legacy businesses. So, but thank you. I think your point is well taken and very important. So thank you.
Councilmember Reed with 3 minutes and 45 seconds left.
Yeah, I'm only taking 30 of those. So I was hoping that Paul Zamazak, Paul Z, as he said earlier, would be here. I don't know if he's still
I am available on
wonderful.
Zoom.
Thank you. So I just, if you can maybe, or Councilmember Kelly, whoever is most prepared, talk about some of those metrics that we'll be looking at to measure the efficacy of this?
Sure. So Councilmember Kelly, if you could back me up here. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. My apologies for not being present in the chambers. I was there earlier and frankly didn't anticipate that this would be pulled from the agenda. So the first phase of this particular program that's been spearheaded by Councilmember Kelly really is about bringing forth, and I don't want to kind of just repeat the entire program because I think it's before you, but really is a retention effort and to highlight kind of the cultural, longstanding businesses in Evanston. I will be frank with you. We do not have a set of standards in place to show the efficacy of the plan website and the plaques and the recognition that we'll provide. And I think we'll have to build that. And part of that is really how many businesses have we retained, right? On an annual basis, how many, we could do things like how many social media impressions have we made, how many businesses that are identified as legacy businesses, how many are retained on an annual basis. But we're just building the program. There's time to develop this. So I don't want to kind of pretend to give you a series of measures we can provide, but this is a classic business retention effort. This is really about showing love to businesses that have committed to being here, and it's the 80-20 rule, not to throw out cliches, but let's spend 20% of our time retaining those businesses and we can spend the rest of that time doing the minimal work on doing attraction work. Councilmember Kelly, I know I'm not doing your program justice, but what else would you add to that?
So first I'd say our program, but I think we've also been studying other legacy business programs in the United States, so I think we'll be consulting with them also. And I think we will develop, because of, I think your points are important. Just even individually, I'd like to find ways that we can work with the individual entities to see if business has improved, as well as retention overall in the city. So, and I speak just anecdotally from every ward meeting. I bring in local first ward businesses, and I've heard more than a handful of times, oh my gosh, after being at the ward meeting with the promotion, like that business, I'm just throwing that in there. But I do think we will look to find a way to measure with individual businesses how this has actually supported them in financial outcome.
Thank you for that. And so I appreciate the response there, and I appreciate the frank response that right now we don't quite have measurables on this. And I appreciate, the thought of a measurable being, business retention year over year. I think that's a fine one. I think the natural environment will add new legacy businesses every year as folks become eligible for it, and as folks decide to shut their doors or as the economy evolves, some folks will fall off. I think a real an interesting measurable would be looking at sales tax revenue. If we were to take all of the legacy businesses, determine what their sales tax revenue is now, and track that year over year to see if there's an actual increase. To me, that's really, if we're going to make an investment, and this is a fairly small one, this initial investment, but it's leading toward larger, and I think it's leading toward larger and maybe more substantial investments down the line. So I just want to make sure that we're measuring our return on investment and, seeing what is, setting a baseline for sales tax revenue with our legacy businesses and tracking that year over year. I don't think that would violate, because of the number of legacy businesses, I don't think that would violate state laws around releasing sales tax information, and it's such a diverse array of industries. I think it would be fine to look at that number in aggregate and track that year over year. I think, to me, that would be one of the important measures of efficacy here. So thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, will the clerk please take the roll on item ED1?
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Hadakaris?
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly?
Aye.
Councilmember Harris? Councilmember Nguyen?
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Gravel?
Aye.
With 8 voting in favor and none voting against, the motion carries and the contract is approved. This brings us to call of the wards. Councilmember Reed.
Yes, we will have a 8th ward meeting next Thursday at 6 p.m. We will have Director Kano joining us to discuss public works issues. I think Manager Zamilzak will be there as well to discuss an art park in the 8th ward, if that's not next month. So really looking forward to the 8th ward meeting. We'll have the newsletter out by this Thursday for next Thursday. It's really important. I encourage residents of particularly my ward, but all wards, to join the ward meetings. It's a really important opportunity that all of us, I think here, almost all of us, provide residents to engage with us, and so hopefully more and more folks do participate. Last month I sent out a particular email asking people to participate, and we saw an increase in people turning out just by asking them and letting them know how important it is for them to turn out. And so I think I will continue that messaging, and I really encourage folks to participate. Thank you.
Councilmember Hadakaris.
Nothing to report.
Councilmember Kelly.
Important First Ward and also with Fourth Ward community meeting this Wednesday at 7 o'clock to discuss the proposed high-rise that would impact both wards. That's both virtual and in person at 7 o'clock in the Parasol Room on the 4th floor here, and then a virtual ward meeting on Thursday. That's all. Thank you.
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you. So we just wrapped up redistricting. We had a special appearance by Councilmember Newsma, and I want to say thank you for allowing the second ward to have some stake in it because we were not seated at that time. The next second ward council meeting will be February 28th, and it will be virtual. Thank you.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Office hours this Thursday at Brothers K from 7:30 till 10 a.m.
Councilmember Nusma.
No report.
Councilmember Burns.
No report.
Councilmember Ravel.
Wednesday at 7 p.m., a virtual special topic ward meeting. This is the one that's been postponed a couple of times. It's going to feature Levy Catering talking about alcohol sales at Welsh Ryan Arena and how alcohol sales would be handled at the stadium. So that's this Wednesday at 7 p.m.
Seeing nothing further to come before us, the February 13th meeting of the Evanston City Council stands adjourned. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Do we have executive session? We had a packet. Oh, okay.